Chapter 240. Seeing the three of them laughing, Bai Yanfei lost his composure. He angrily said, "Jiang Min, you're a woman, yet you don't care about your face?" Junior Marshall's sister Jiang continued to sneer. "When did you ever give me face? Bai Yanfei, I've never been humiliated like this in my life. You made me lose face, yet you're blaming me for being shameless." Very few people would talk to Bai Yanfei so rudely, but the ones who spoke to him coldly were all women, especially when the last person who spoke to him like this was right next to him. He awkwardly glanced at the three people who were watching from the side, then fiercely glared at Jiang Min. "Whatever you say, in short, this is how it is." After saying that, he turned his head and ignored them, angrily leaving. Junior Marshall's sister Jiang laughed and followed him. "Bai Yanfei, you admit defeat?" Bai Yanfei said angrily. "Why would I admit defeat?" Junior Marshall's sister Jiang gave him a sidelong glance. "You're too pretentious. No matter what you're thinking, you have to pretend to look down on everyone." "Oomph. Is that good for you?" "Jiang Min," Bai Yanfei shouted again. This Junior Marshall's sister Jiang spoke too rudely and didn't leave him any face. "What's wrong? Do you feel uncomfortable?" Junior Marshall's sister Jiang didn't let him go and followed him reluctantly. "If you admit defeat and take back what you said, I won't pester you anymore." "Why?" Bai Yanfei said angrily. "You're unruly and hateful. You said I look down on people, but your nose is still up in the sky. I only snort a few times with my nose up in the sky, unlike you. If a bird flies above me, some unknown object might fall into your nose. You're a girl. Don't you think it's rude to say that? You're the one who said I'm unruly. So what if I'm rude?" The two of them bickered as they walked further and further away. The three of them stood there for a while before regaining their senses. Luo Fengxue sighed and shook her head. Morning Sun Peak will be lively in the future. Tinga pursed her lips and smiled. "Aren't you very happy?" Luo Fengxue smiled. "When I'm free, I just watch a show." Yi Jingwen, however, shook his head. "Don't celebrate too early. In my opinion, they might not succeed." Upon hearing what he said, Luo Fengxue tilted her head. "Why?" Yi Jingwen said, "Although this martial uncle Bai isn't much in other aspects, he is very persistent. Have you ever seen him go back on his word?" Both Tinga and Luo Fengxue muttered to themselves. In the end, they shook their heads. Yi Jingwen smiled. This martial uncle Bai values his face very much. His refusal to accept Martial Uncle Zhang's offer is already set in stone. Our entire sect is well aware of it. If he were to go back on his word, wouldn't he be slapping his own face? Besides, Martial Uncle Jiang was pestering him to the point that he couldn't stand it anymore. If he admitted defeat, he would lose face. That's why I said that it's hard to say who will have the last laugh. After pausing for a moment, he continued, "Actually, among us male disciples, we are hoping that Martial Uncle Jiang won't marry this Martial Uncle Bai." Luo Fengxue was curious. "What do you male disciples say about Junior Marshall's sister Jiang? And what about this Junior Bai?" Although she had always been in charge of disciples' affairs, there were still differences between men and women. Some gossip couldn't reach female disciples' ears, so she took this opportunity to ask. Yi Jingwen said, "Oh, we all say that Martial Uncle Bai relies on the fact that he's Grandmaster Xinjiang's disciple and has his eyes on the top of his head, making people not want to get close to him. As for Martial Uncle Jiang, some people think she's unruly and willful, so it's best to keep a respectful distance from her. However, some people think she's beautiful and has a straightforward temperament. Although she's willful, she's also cute." Luo Fengxue sighed. Sure enough, there are differences between men and women. Regarding Bai Yanfei, some female disciples also said he was dissolute and unrestrained. Although he was arrogant, he was more charming. As for Jiang Min, her reputation was a bit worse. People said she relied on Grandmaster Lingxiu to look down on others. Whether it was men or women, they were always more tolerant toward the opposite sex. Yi Jingwen smiled. He didn't need to ask to know what Luo Fengxue meant. He looked around then asked, "Junior Marshall's sister Luo, you haven't picked any medicinal plants yet, right?" Luo Fengxue hastily turned around to look. Fortunately, no one had broken out of the formation in the vicinity recently, so her spiritual plants were still there. I almost forgot. Yi Jingwen also hadn't finished picking his medicinal plants. Tinga looked at him, then said, Feng Shue, let me help you. She came here after picking the medicinal plants, so she'd already finished her own business. Luo Feng Shue didn't refuse. With their friendship, she wasn't afraid of pocketing anything. She immediately waved her hand. Okay, come quickly. Yi Jingwen was halfway through picking, but Luo Feng Shue hadn't started yet. The two of them worked together, so they were a bit faster than Yi Jingwen. Before long, they finally finished picking everything. Now that they were done with their business, the three of them talked about what they encountered in the formation. Sure enough, the formations they encountered were very normal, separated 5 spiritual formations. Tinga was the only one who encountered a mutated formation. Yi Jingwen and Luo Feng Shue were extremely shocked to learn that Tinga encountered a mutated 4 spiritual formation. They were even more speechless about how she was able to escape smoothly. After a long time, Luo Feng Shue finally patted her shoulder and said, Tinga, you should form your gold core soon. Tinga was puzzled. Why? Luo Feng Shue said earnestly, if you don't form your gold core, us foundation-building cultivators won't be able to survive. Although her words were exaggerated, she was actually praising her. Tinga couldn't help but laugh. I'm just relying on the treasures I have. If she didn't have Xiaohua and the 2 stone sculpture puppets, it really wouldn't have been that easy for her to break the formation. We've broken the first test, but what about the second test? Luo Feng Shue had a well-thought-out plan for this. We'll just walk around casually. When the time comes, it'll naturally activate. Yi Jingwen asked, the 3 of us are in the same place. Will we enter the formation together, or will we be separated? We might be together, but we might also be separated. Luo Feng Shue shook her head and said, it'd be good if we were separated. The second test, 5 hindrances overturning senses, will produce illusions. If we're together and affect each other, it'll be even more troublesome. Cultivators' divine comprehensions could also affect each other, especially when they were very close. If one of them felt uneasy, the others would also be affected. Huh? Yi Jingwen was surprised. Why didn't the sect head tell us before we came? Luo Feng Shue said, it'll only affect us a little. Moreover, generally speaking, it won't be life-threatening. She then carefully warned them. However, you still have to be careful. After the 5 hindrances overturning senses test, there's the third test, 5 confusions entangling spirit. At that time, illusions visible to the naked eye will appear. The previous test directly attacks our divine comprehensions. Generally speaking, we just need to meditate and stay firm to our hearts. Then we'll be able to pass. The second test will produce real illusions, but it'll be hard to distinguish between real and fake. If we're unlucky and the second test comes before we even pass the previous test, we might fall into a demonic barrier. Upon hearing this, Tinga recalled that during the demonic beast riot many years ago, she and Wei Jiasi once entered a bewildering formation laid by bewitching moonstones. What they saw with their own eyes was like what they saw with their own eyes. Presumably, the last test, 5 confusions entangling spirit, was like that. As for the 5 hindrances overturning senses, it was more like an inner demon during a realm breakthrough. There were countless thoughts that directly attacked one's divine comprehension. If one's willpower wasn't strong enough, one would be confused by these thoughts and hallucinate, even getting lost inside. Of course, this was only a magic formation for training, so there shouldn't be any life-threatening dangers. However, if one really got hit, injuries would be unavoidable. If things weren't good, it might even leave an irrecoverable mental injury. Lord Taoist Jinghe briefly mentioned these things to her before they set off, and sect head Shen also reminded the disciples to always remember the 4 words, all laws of nature. However, even though they said that, they didn't know how many people would actually be able to do it. Yi Jingwen pondered. In that case, aren't we going to experience the inner demon during core formation ahead of time? You're right, Luo Fengshui said, of course, this five hindrances overturning senses formation is still a bit weaker than the inner demon during core formation. Since the distant past era, cultivators' abilities have declined a lot, but the power of inner demons has always been the same. Therefore, for cultivators like us, inner demons are especially terrifying. What she said made Yi Jingwen frown. Why didn't the school elders explain this in detail before we entered the formation? Luo Fengshui smiled and said, Senior Martial Brother Yi, don't worry. For people like us who usually don't relax and cultivate, it's not difficult to pass this test. Oh, Yi Jingwen muttered to himself. What about the last test? When this was mentioned, Luo Fengshui's expression turned solemn. I reckon only a few people can pass the last test. That illusion was too real. In our school, even nascent soul martial uncles found it very difficult to pass the first test. As for senior martial brothers and sisters in the core formation realm, there were a few who persisted until the third test, but in the end, none of them could pass completely. It's that difficult? It wasn't just Yi Jingwen. Even Mo Tiange was staring at her. Then is it safe for us to pass this test? Luo Fengshui smiled and said, Tiange, did you forget this is a magic formation for training? There won't be any life-threatening danger. Unless we kill each other, this magic formation won't harm our lives. It was limited by the school's rules. Presumably, it was possible for fellow disciples to trip each other up, but it shouldn't be to the extent of killing each other. Luo Fengshui continued to say, Our martial uncle Sushin has entered this formation before. She said that in the second test, you can still distinguish between reality and illusion by guarding your mind. However, in the last test, it's basically as if it's real. Moreover, your reason will gradually leave you, just like a dream. You'll also treat some absurd things as real. Isn't this even more powerful than the bewitching moonstone? Mo Tiange couldn't help but wonder if her spirit-concealing pendant had any effect on this. Yi Jingwen asked first, Are things like heart-cleansing talismans and the like useful? They are, Luo Fengshui said with certainty, but it's hard to say how effective they are. Mo Tiange nodded, indicating that she understood. That's to say, we'd better not get too close or too far away from each other. It wouldn't be good if they got too close and affected each other's divine comprehension, but if they got too far away, they wouldn't be able to take care of each other. Luo Fengshui agreed. The three of us just happened to run into each other. It'd be too inexcusable if we didn't take care of each other. For the sake of safety, let's split up later. We'll keep a certain distance from each other. Don't lose each other, but don't get too close either. Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen didn't have any objections. Although their cultivation levels were higher than Luo Fengshui's in fights of magical powers, Luo Fengshui's ability to handle matters was far inferior to theirs. Furthermore, she had a lot of insider information, so she should know better than them what to do. All right, we might enter the second test any time, so let's split up now. Chapter 241. The three of them separated from each other about 100 feet away and followed her unhurriedly, neither too far nor too slow. In fact, to Mo Tiange, who spread out her divine sense, this distance was equivalent to nothing. However, it was better than nothing. If she restrained her divine sense, the influence of her divine comprehension would be reduced. Mo Tiange even looked forward to the second test. If nothing unexpected happened, after this matter was over, she would enter closed-door meditation until she reached the peak stage of the foundation-building realm and then try to advance to the core formation realm. For cultivators like them who had never experienced the core formation realm before, the most frightening test was the inner demon. If the five hindrances overturning senses in the second test were like inner demons, then she would have to experience a similar test before advancing to the core formation realm. At that time, she would have some experience and would know how to deal with it. After the three of them walked for a while, Yi Jingwen asked quietly, Why isn't there any movement? He used his divine sense to transmit his voice, so their surroundings were still quiet. Mo Tiange also felt something was wrong. She frowned and thought for a while, then asked, Why is there no one else but us? Yi Jingwen was shocked. That's right. Our speed in breaking the formation is considered fast. But after such a long time, shouldn't there be more people breaking the formation? Luo Fengshua pondered. In the foundation building realm, the number of people who can pass the first test shouldn't be few, but it also shouldn't be too many. However, there really shouldn't be no one else but us. Luo Fengshua frowned for a long time, then suddenly shouted, "Maybe we're already in the second test. The 5 hindrances overturning senses, so we can't sense the situation around us." Mo Tinga looked around and saw that they were already in the belly of the mountain. The surrounding rock walls were still the same as before, but the terrain was no longer the same as before. There was more soil, and there were many spiritual plants growing densely in the surroundings. She didn't know where the sunlight came from, but it illuminated everything. Yi Jingwen unsheathed his flying sword and guarded his body. "Junior Martial Sister Luo, are you sure? Is there any danger around us?" Luo Fengshua carefully examined the situation around them, then closed her eyes to ponder. In the end, she nodded cautiously. "It should be. Try to spread your divine sense. How far can you spread it?" Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen closed their eyes and spread their divine senses. Not long after, the two of them wore grave expressions. There was indeed a problem. Their divine senses could only extend several hundred feet before they could sense 3 people. Luo Fengshua said, "It's starting. Let's guard our minds and stop affecting each other." Even though the 3 of them were together, the other 2 would be affected if one of them made a mistake, so it was better for them to go their separate ways. Since Luo Fengshua said that, neither Mo Tiange nor Yi Jingwen had any objections. They each looked for a place and prepared to experience the 5 hindrances overturning senses test. Mo Tiange laid a simple defensive formation around them, then sat down cross-legged to guard against any mishaps. Closing his eyes, he cut off all the surrounding sensations and shut off his spiritual sense, focusing only on his own knowledge sea. The spiritual energy circulated naturally and calmed his mind. Very quickly, she felt that she had entered a magical realm. Everything around her was far away, and it was as if she was in an empty field. The wind was rustling, the wind was gentle, and she was the only person in the world. Mo Tiange also didn't expect that this time she would actually enter the divine, forgetting selfless state so coincidentally. The state of mind was a very mysterious topic. Generally speaking, this kind of state of mind was very difficult to communicate with others. When teachers taught their disciples, they could only guide them slowly, but everyone's feelings were different, so in the end, they still had to rely on themselves. The only way to cultivate one state of mind was to see, hear, and see. Only by gaining some comprehension could one make progress. There was no other way. Mo Tiange didn't think she'd experienced much in the more than 20 years she'd been traveling outside. Most of the time, she was trapped in Bishuan Court's Tao Achieving Pagoda. In fact, the pressure Ren Yufeng felt inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda was also a kind of state of mind cultivation. Moreover, when she studied the notes Mo Yaoqing left behind in the pagoda, she saw Mo Yaoqing's life experiences, so this was also a state of mind cultivation. When she arrived in the secular world, she went to Yi Clan to check on second uncle's situation. Then, she happened to enter Zue's Immortal's cave and learned about Wanderer Zue's life, as well as the ill-fated relationship between Yao Zixio and Shang Ruan. Then, she went to the northernmost glaciers and encountered Ren Yufeng's incident. Finally, she arrived at the Eastern Sea. In these more than 20 years, Mo Tiange's state of mind had unknowingly reached a certain realm, so she easily entered the divine forgetfulness and anatta state in this 5 hindrances overturning senses test, which was similar to an inner demon. Mo Tiange didn't know how much time had passed, but in her hazy state, she seemed to have returned to the Mo family's village in Jin country. "Husband, do you really want to leave?" Although she was dressed like a married woman, the woman's face still retained the childishness of a young girl. She looked at the man in front of her reluctantly. This man was about 30 years old. Compared to his wife, he was indeed a bit older, but he was refined and had a calm demeanor. He had a mature charm that a young man in his early 20s didn't have. He looked at his young wife and comforted her. "Don't worry, I'll be back in a few days." But the woman wanted to say something, but stopped. She lowered her head and said nothing. The man smiled gently. He took his wife's hand and placed it on her flat belly. "I'll try my best to rush back before the child is born. During this period of time, if you have any problems, just tell sister-in-law Wang. I've asked her to take care of you." The woman was a bit shy. "Husband, you already know? How could I not know?" He stared at his wife's belly, which still couldn't be seen. There was an imperceptible, gloomy look in his eyes. "I hope this child can be safe and sound." Several years later, "Mother, why don't I have a father?" The little girl with bruises on her face asked her sickly and pale mother. Her mother, who was gently applying medicine on her, stopped when she heard this question. "Mother," the woman regained her composure and shook her head. "Don't listen to their nonsense. Your father went out to do something. He'll come back when he's done." But the little girl was confused. Did father go to a very, very far place? He still hasn't come back? In very, very far. Therefore, she made a wish that day, hoping her father would come back soon. That way, no one would say she was a child without a father anymore. Then, Tinga, your father is back. That day was her birthday. Her mother cooked longevity noodles and fried a poached egg for her. She heard Annie Wang's voice from next door. A man walked in from outside the courtyard. He looked travel-worn, but he had a smile on his face. Her father was exactly the same as her mother said. They were kind, gentle, and their smiles made her feel warm. "Tinga, you're Tinga." Her father lowered his body. "You've grown so big. I'm your father." Her mother came out of the room with tears in her eyes. Her father smiled, picked her up, and walked to her mother. "Wife, I'm back. I'll take you away." Asterisk, 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 her wish came true. Everything was vague, as if she was dreaming. However, she saw her father's appearance, and her heart was full of joy. This feeling of joy was real. Her father took her mother and daughter back to Kunwu to teach her cultivation. From the aura refining realm to the foundation building realm, her life was so smooth. She grew up, advanced to the core formation realm, and Yi family didn't decline. Later, she met a man. They liked each other and became dual cultivation partners. Later, she advanced to the nascent soul realm and traveled unhindered in the celestial pole. Unrivaled by anyone, she had more and more things. No matter what she wanted, she would eventually get it. Kinship, friendship, love, family, cultivation level, spiritual treasures. Finally, she entered the deification realm and became a godlike existence in the world. She stood at the top of the world, looking down at the world below her. Everything was in her hands, but she felt empty, as if she hadn't obtained anything. She suddenly began to doubt whether everything was real or not. If it wasn't real, why did it feel so real? If it was real, why was everything in front of her always so blurry? She liked this feeling of completeness too much. There wouldn't be any deep regrets in the depths of her heart that couldn't be buried no matter how hard she tried. But why did she feel empty, as if she hadn't obtained anything? Suddenly, she felt a chill in her chest, waking her up from her beautiful dream. Tinga opened her eyes, feeling a lingering fear. She had entered a state of selflessness and guarded her heart, but she still fell into the trap. She really didn't know what would have happened to someone with an unstable state of mind. She looked around and found 5 or 6 people sitting around her. Yi Jingwen and Luo Fengshui were also among them. Sure enough, Luo Fengshui's guess was right. In fact, they entered the second test not long after they walked out, but she was still a loss, so she couldn't see the surrounding scene. This test made Tinga realize that although she wasn't trapped in anger, obsession, slow-wittedness, and doubt, her greed was deeply buried in her heart. She wanted to return to her childhood, find her father, and have a complete family. She also wanted to enter the cultivation world smoothly instead of wandering around for more than 10 years. She wanted to have relatives, friends, and lovers. She wanted everything to be complete. She also wanted to succeed in her cultivation, advance to the deification realm, and laugh proudly in the world. As it turned out, she was actually this greedy. As it turned out, she never forgot these childhood regrets. Ever since she came to Xianxing school, her cultivation path had been very smooth, and she always thought she didn't have any other desires aside from the path of cultivation. As it turned out, she still had her greed suppressed in her subconscious. Thinking up to this point, cold sweat broke out on Mo Tianga's forehead. If she hadn't entered this 10,000 laws of nature formation this time, she wouldn't have realized there were flaws in her state of mind. If she tried to advance to the core formation realm like this, there would definitely be some twists and turns. Fortunately, she happened to enter this 10,000 laws of nature formation before she advanced to the core formation realm, so she realized the weakness of her state of mind. In the following time, she definitely had to solve this greed before she could advance to the core formation realm. After making up her mind, Mo Tiange closed her eyes again and continued to adjust her breath for a while. It was only after she regained her composure that she stood up and began to pick the spiritual plants around her. What to do next was a bit difficult for her. Yi Jingwen and Luo Fengxue were still here. From time to time, expressions of pain or happiness appeared on their faces. Obviously, they were still undergoing the test of the 5 hindrances overturning senses. They originally agreed to take care of each other, but her current situation was a bit special. It wasn't like what Luo Fengxue said. After the second test, she wouldn't directly enter the third test. If she stayed here, she didn't know what kind of illusion she'd have. What if she thought everyone around her was her enemy? After a while, no one around her was clear-headed. Everyone was still going through their own mental test. Mo Tiange thought for a while, then stood up and continued to walk inside. She had her doubts about whether she should stay or not, so she might as well do as she pleased. Besides, there were a lot of spiritual plants here, so it would be good if she could pick some more. As she walked and picked spiritual plants, she gradually walked further and further away. She gradually forgot where she was. Chapter 242. The phoenix flowers that filled the sky dyed the small path between the rock walls a deep red. No one could have expected that there would be such a secret path inside the mountain. The path changed from light red to pink to dark red, and was surrounded by red envelopes of different shades. Mo Tiange took a closer look. This was a kind of phoenix tree with fallen leaves. Based on how lush it was, it probably grew from the Middle Ages until now. The branches of the fallen phoenix tree could be used to refine tools, and the flowers and fruits could be used to refine pills. It was truly a treasure. She opened the medicine pouch and slowly picked up the ripe fruit that had fallen to the ground. This was the most precious part of the fallen phoenix wood. Then he picked the flowers and 1 or 2 branches that didn't affect the main trunk and put them into his chinquan bag. Once she was done, Mo Tiange went back the way she came. However, she found that she could not remember the way she came. There were many forks in the rock walls of this mountain. For cultivators, this wasn't something difficult to distinguish. However, when Mo Tiange stood at the fork, she found that she really forgot where she came from. This feeling of loss was something she had never felt before. In the beginning, she suspected that she had not passed the second stage at all, which was why she had this feeling of not remembering the way at all. However, what he saw in front of him was too real. The fragrance of the soil, the brilliance of the phoenix wood, whether it was what he saw, heard, or touched, it was so real that he couldn't tell it was fake. Could this be the third stage? She pondered. The 5 confusions' haunting spirit. Everything she saw was an illusion, but it was no different from reality. Thinking of this, he made a prompt decision and found a place to sit under the phoenix tree. When you don't understand the situation, it's best to deal with it by remaining unchanged. Furthermore, the 5 confusions' plaguing spirit was just an illusion. If he didn't see anything, he probably wouldn't be affected. She stuck a heart-calming talisman on her body and swallowed a soul-calming pill. After thinking for a moment, she took off the spirit-concealing pendant and held it in her hand. She then sat down cross-legged and closed her eyes, preparing to face the third test. Although the spirit-concealing pendant could still be used by hanging it around his neck, It would be more effective if he placed it on his palm, where it would be directly attached to his meridians. That dreamlike feeling appeared again. She was in a daze, as if her rationality had left her. She felt like she was about to fall asleep. Grandmaster, in a haze, Tinga heard a voice. She opened her eyes and saw Ruan Mingzhu through the sparse leaves and branches of the phoenix tree. Why was she here? Also, why did he call her Grandmaster? A moment ago, she was still thinking like that, but the next moment, she felt there was nothing wrong with Ruan Mingzhu being here. Why did she feel there was something wrong with her? Ruan Mingzhu didn't see Tinga. There was a sweet and innocent smile on her face. As she walked, she kept glancing at the people around her as if she was walking together with someone else. But the seat beside her was clearly empty. Grandmaster. While walking, Ruan Mingzhu pouted and said, "Senior Marshal brother ignored me, but you didn't even talk to him." After a while, she seemed to hear the people beside her say something. She pursed her lips and said reluctantly, "Why do I have to learn from senior brother? We're only in our 20s, yet we're already at the foundation building realm. Are we afraid that we won't have enough time to form our gold core? In my opinion, it's not normal for senior brother to act like an old man at such a young age." After saying that, she paused for a while before covering her mouth and laughing, looking very happy. In any case, I want to be happy. What's the purpose of cultivating? It's not for the sake of locking myself in a cave for seclusion. At that moment, Ruan Mingzhu had already arrived in front of the phoenix tree. She raised her head to look at the red phoenix tree, but she couldn't see Tinga, who was sitting not far from her. Wow, it's so beautiful. Next time, I must bring Senior Marshal brother here to see it. After she said that, her expression became confused for a moment before she slowly revealed a smile. "Senior Marshal brother, I'll take you to see something." "Aya, let's go. Then, she seemed to be pulling someone and walked all the way to the phoenix tree. "Look, isn't it beautiful?" After a while, she humphed and said with displeasure, "Senior Marshal brother, you're accompanying me to play now? Can't you focus a bit?" "Aya." Ruan Mingzhu's current smile was completely like a little girl's. She didn't have any schemes and was simply happy. "Senior Marshal brother, you'll be bored to death like this. I don't believe you like cultivating all the time. It's so boring." "Huh." She reached out to pull that non-existent person. "Senior Marshal brother, you have to smile more. You look so good when you smile." Tinga opened her eyes and stared at Ruan Mingzhu, who was not far from her. Her vision blurred for a moment, and a person quietly appeared next to Ruan Mingzhu. He reached out and stroked Ruan Mingzhu's head, saying, "Don't talk nonsense. We'll go back after we've had enough fun." Ruan Mingzhu turned her head. "No, I don't want to go back. Senior Marshal brother, it wasn't easy for us to come out." The spirit-concealing pendant in her palm felt cold. Tinga quivered, and her mind became somewhat clear-headed, but she was confused by what she saw. Is this real or fake? Is it Ruan Mingzhu's illusion or mine? As soon as this thought emerged in her mind, the person in front of her slowly faded away. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed she was affected by Ruan Mingzhu. Because Ruan Mingzhu was experiencing an illusion, she also thought of a person who should exist. After a while, Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed again. Her originally charming and cute little girl appearance disappeared and was replaced by an aggressive and angry look. "Do you think I don't know what you're thinking?" She angrily pointed at the phoenix tree in front of them. "I'm telling you, don't be delusional. Take a look at yourself. You want to steal my senior marshal brother? In your dreams. You're still talking back to me? That's right. Even if I'm Grandmaster's grand disciple. So what? I can call you senior marshal brother, but can you? Wei Jiasi, take a clear look at your identity." This, Tinga wanted to hear more clearly, but her own mind was also starting to become muddled. Ruan Mingzhu's voice was both near and far. "Fine, I'll teach you a lesson today. What do you do about it?" Anger emerged on Ruan Mingzhu's face. She regarded the phoenix tree as Wei Jiasi and raised her hand, thrusting her sword forward. A leaf was cut off from the phoenix tree. Tinga wanted to stand up, but she discovered that her consciousness was hazy, What's going on? Fortunately, Ruan Mingzhu stopped. A mournful expression appeared on her face. Grandmaster, what did you say? No, don't drive me away, she shouted. Grandmaster, I didn't mean it. I really didn't mean it. Don't drive me away, okay? She begged bitterly, while looking at the person who originally didn't exist. Senior Marshal Brother, help me tell Grandmaster that I didn't do it on purpose. I just want to teach her a lesson, but I didn't expect I'd be so heavy-handed. What's the difference between going to the branch courtyard and driving me away? Grandmaster, for my father's sake, can you forgive me this once? I promise I won't do it again. This time it's for real. She started to cry. She squatted on the ground, tears streaming down her face. After a long time, she finally wiped the tears off her face. You won't let me go back. Fine, I won't go back. Let's see when you'll come to pick me up. But she was disappointed. From being angry in the beginning, her expression slowly turned numb as she sat there in a daze. Then, after a long time, she laughed happily. I can go back. I can really go back. She smiled happily. I knew Grandmaster and Senior Marshal Brother loved me the most. They definitely wouldn't let me stay there alone. Grandmaster. She jumped up, but in the next second, the smile on her face froze. Grandmaster, you still want to send me back? She shouted. Why? It's been 60 years. Isn't that enough? To punish me isn't enough to leave me in that place. I don't want to go back. Senior Marshal Brother. She seemed to have seen something and anxiously tried to grab someone. Senior Marshal Brother, I'm back. The smile on her face only lasted for a while before it turned into disbelief. Senior Marshal Brother, what did you say? Even you. She fell to the ground, muttering to herself, You really don't like me anymore? Why? Why won't you forgive me after so long? Why do you always say it's my fault? In the past, even if I did something wrong, you'd always forgive me. But this time, do you really plan on never forgiving me? Tears slowly flowed down her haggard face and dripped on her hands. She didn't even have the strength to cry. Her eyes were filled with despair. What am I still alive for? No one likes me. Even Grandmaster and Senior Marshal Brother don't like me anymore. She slowly raised her head and stared fixedly at a certain place, as if she was looking for something. After a long time, hatred and sorrow flashed in her eyes. So you already have someone to replace me? What Marshal Uncle Mo? Grandmaster, Senior Marshal Brother, look at me. I'm Mingzhu. I'm the only Mingzhu you love. Grandmaster, no, you don't like Mingzhu anymore? I don't accept it. She's obviously mine. Grandmaster is mine, and Senior Marshal Brother is also mine. A fierce expression appeared on Ruan Mingzhu's face. She slowly turned her head and approached Mo Tiange, who was sitting cross-legged under the phoenix tree. Wei Jiasi, do you want to laugh at me? Oomph. Ruan Mingzhu's expression clearly showed that she regarded her as Wei Jiasi. Mo Tiange opened her eyes. She felt something was wrong, but she couldn't say what it was. Ruan Mingzhu drew her sword and slowly stood up. So what if I teach you another lesson? In any case, it's like you said, I have nothing left. Mo Tiange watched helplessly as Ruan Mingzhu raised her hand and stabbed the sword in her hand. In a flash, Mo Tiange finally moved. She raised her hand and blocked the sword with her spiritual aura, but she couldn't hold the thing in her hand, and it fell. Ruan Mingzhu bent down to pick it up. It was a jade pendant. It was round and had a warm color. It was painted with cloud patterns and tied with a red string. In the middle of the other side, a small Qin character was engraved. Ruan Mingzhu's eyes widened. She was surprised at first, then puzzled. Then her expression turned gloomy and anger emerged. Her fingers trembled. Senior Marshal Brother, you actually gave this jade pendant away. Her gaze gradually turned cold. She turned to look at Mo Tiange, but it was unclear whether she was talking to Mo Tiange or talking to herself. Grandmaster and Senior Marshal Brother hate me. People in the school look down on me. Why do I still want to be Ruan Mingzhu? No, I don't want to be Ruan Mingzhu anymore. Her gaze was gloomy as it fell on Mo Tiange's face. It's good to be you. Grandmaster's disciple. I can openly call him Senior Marshal Brother. I also have good aptitudes. Maybe in a few decades, I'll be able to advance to the core formation realm. At that time, A dreamy smile appeared on her face. Then, I'll be you. Chapter 243. She suddenly felt his eyebrows twitch. Something seemed to have happened. He opened his eyes, frowned, and thought for a while. Cultivators sometimes had ominous and auspicious premonitions. His current situation was precisely an ominous premonition. Could it be that something had happened? He couldn't think of a reason, so he called out, "Jinji." Halfway through his call, he paused. Jinji wasn't here today because he went to participate in the 10,000 Laws of Nature Formations trial. Could it be related to Jinji? After thinking for a while, he still felt uncertain. He stood up, opened the door of his cave, and slowly walked out. The sun was shining brightly outside, and he was in a trance for a moment. Yes, he hadn't come out for many years. He couldn't even remember how many years it had been. This was the longest closed-door meditation he'd ever had. He hadn't left his cave for more than 30 years and directly advanced from the middle stage of the core formation realm to the peak stage of the core formation realm. He was only one step away from forming his nascent soul. Originally, he planned to continue his closed-door meditation until he formed his nascent soul. But now it seemed the space between his eyebrows was throbbing. He felt he didn't have time to think. With a wave of his sleeve, a pure white cloud appeared under his feet. He stepped on the cloud and flew towards the main peak. When the 10,000 Laws of Nature Formation appeared, his master also asked him to go in and take a look, but he refused with the excuse that he was in closed-door meditation. Now, he didn't know where the formation was. However, as soon as he spread his divine sense, he easily found a crowded place at the foot of the main peak. Presumably, it was there. Without any hesitation, he stepped on the cloud and flew down. When he landed at the bottom of the valley, he already saw the hustle and bustle. Many disciples had come out after failing the test, and they were densely surrounding something. The core formation elders in charge of the scene had long sensed his spiritual aura pressure. One of them was about to see who it was, but when he pushed the disciples aside, he was startled. Junior Marshal Brother Shojing? He approached him. "Senior Marshal Brother, what happened?" "Oh." The elder reacted and said, "You came at the right time. A disciple from your Clear Spring Peak had an accident." She frowned but didn't say anything. He followed the elder into the crowd. Junior Marshal Brother Shojing. School head Shun, who was squatting on the ground, greeted him. Before she could say anything, he saw the disciple lying on the ground. After a while, he found his voice again. "What's going on?" One of the elders said, "There's a problem in the third test." The two disciples bumped into each other, and one of them had a hallucination of a real person, but the other was unlucky. It was the 5 confusions plaguing Spirit, and his mind was starting to blur. So, following the elder's gaze, she furrowed his brows again. Mingzhu, Ruan Mingzhu, was currently sitting in the corner. She was in a daze and shivering. She didn't even respond when Mo Tiange called her. Head Shin said she was sent out when she was plagued by a demonic spell. It's best not to summon her now. She nodded. His gaze was fixed on Mo Tiange, who was lying unconscious on the ground. "Didn't you say this was a trial formation and there wouldn't be any danger?" As school head Shun continued to channel spiritual aura into Mo Tiange's body, he said, "Her life won't be in danger. As soon as this disciple suffered a fatal attack, she was sent out. However, her mind was in a state of confusion, and her mind was momentarily damaged. That's why she became like this." "I see." Upon seeing that sect head Shun had withdrawn her hand, he also crouched down, felt Mo Tiange's pulse, and inserted his spiritual aura into her pulse. There were no problems with her meridians, and her dantian was also intact. Her sea of knowledge was closed. He furrowed his brows. Her sea of knowledge was closed, and it could be big or small. Although there wouldn't be any danger to her life, being attacked while she was undergoing a mental test was definitely very dangerous. If the stimulation was excessive, she might not wake up for 10 or 20 years, or she might never wake up. He looked up at Ruan Mingzhu, wanting to say something. However, judging from her timid appearance, she didn't seem to be in a much better state, so he eventually gave up. Junior Marshal Brother Shojing, This is your junior martial sister from the same room, right? It'd be better if you take her back first. This matter can be big or small, so it's best to let martial uncle Jinghe take a look. Qin nodded without hesitation. All right. He then looked at Ruan Mingzhu and said, Senior martial brother school head, I'll have to trouble you to take care of my martial nephew. I'll send someone to pick her up later. That's what I should do. How could school head Shin refuse? With Lord Taoist Jinghe's personality, it was already very good of him not to settle accounts with them, since his beloved disciple was injured in the formation and his grand disciple was greatly stimulated. Moreover, they indeed couldn't escape responsibility for this matter. Entering this 10,000 laws of nature formation was indeed dangerous, but they were worried these disciples wouldn't be willing to take risks, so they didn't explain in detail and only emphasized to be careful. Master! Yi Zhenji, who had just come out of the formation, happened to see this scene. He followed them with a pale face and looked at Mo Tiange. What's wrong with my aunt? Qin frowned and said, Let's talk about it when we get back. With a flick of his sleeve, he summoned the flying cloud and flew back to Clear Spring Peak with Yi Zhenji. The flying cloud's speed reached its limit. In a flash, it had already reached the summit of Clear Spring Peak and landed in front of Enchanting Palace. Qin didn't stop and walked towards Enchanting Palace with Mo Tiange in his arms. Martial Uncle Shoujing. The gatekeeping disciple was surprised to see Qin's unhappy expression and Mo Tiange in his arms unconscious. She couldn't care less about these disciples' gazes and directly rushed into Enchanting Palace. Master, Lord Taoist Jinghe's divine sense shrouded the surroundings. Just as he was wondering what happened, he turned around and was shocked. What's going on? She put Mo Tiange down and said anxiously, Master, take a look. She was attacked when she was undergoing the mental test in the formation. I've checked. She looks fine, but her sea of knowledge is closed. Upon hearing this, Lord Taoist Jinghe grabbed Mo Tiange's wrist and felt her meridians to check her injuries. With a single glance, his face darkened. She couldn't help asking, How is it? Lord Taoist Jinghe stroked his beard and frowned. Not good. I guess she must have just discovered her mental state has a weakness and was attacked when she was undergoing the 5 confusions plaguing spirit. Then what should we do? Lord Taoist Jinghe glared at him. Can you stop interrupting me? I haven't finished talking yet. She was speechless from his glare and could only admit his mistake. Okay, I won't. Lord Taoist Jinghe continued to say, She closed her sea of knowledge subconsciously to protect herself, so you don't have to worry about her safety. She should be fine, but it's a bit troublesome to wake her up. After making sure his disciple was fine, Lord Taoist Jinghe stroked his beard and said something, waiting for Qin to ask. However, after Lord Taoist Jinghe said something just now, Qin stopped asking and just stared at him, making him feel very bored. Just as Lord Taoist Jinghe was a bit annoyed, Yi Zhenji hurriedly asked, Grandmaster, what should we do? Yi Zhenji's timely answer made Lord Taoist Jinghe very satisfied. He immediately felt that Yi Zhenji was very pleasing to the eye, so he said with a smile, We don't need to do anything. Just take good care of her and don't let anything happen to her body. After a while, when she realizes there's no danger, she'll naturally open her sea of knowledge slowly. Oh, Yi Zhenji and Qin, she breathed sighs of relief at the same time. Qin, she thought for a while, then asked, Master, how long will she stay in this state? Oh, it'll be a few months if it's short. It'll be a few years if it's long. Then he patted Qin's shoulder and said irresponsibly, Rest assured, she's still young. Even if she wakes up in a few decades, she won't delay her core formation. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand, ignoring Qin's gloomy expression. That'll do. Take her back to Mingxin residence. Let Xiu Qin and the others take care of her. Qin, she endured and endured, but in the end, he couldn't help but say, Master, a few years is fine, but a few decades. Even if she's not immortal, her body will have problems if she stays in a coma like this. Okay? Can't you think of a way? Huh? Yi Jinji originally felt relieved when he heard his aunt was fine, but now he became nervous again. Grandmaster, really? Nonsense. The one who answered was Qin Shi. He frowned deeply and said angrily, cultivators don't need to eat, but we also need to absorb spiritual aura and rely on spiritual aura to survive. If she's in a coma for a few years or a few decades, it'll be no problem for her to live. But if she stops absorbing spiritual aura, her body will wither. Even if she wakes up, her cultivation level will regress. Ah, it's that serious. Yi Jinji turned to look at Lord Taoist Jinghe pitifully. Grandmaster, you can't watch my aunt turn into a shriveled old lady. She's still young. Lord Taoist Jinghe sprayed out a mouthful of tea. Shriveled old lady. Ha ha. You brat, you can think of something like that. Master, Qin, she glared at him angrily. If you want to laugh, you can laugh slowly when you're done. Now think of a way for me. What way? Lord Taoist Jinghe spread his hands with an innocent expression. I told you, she'll wake up naturally after a while. Really? Qin, she's expression darkened. You don't want the 9 revolutions mind-calming pills anymore. Brat, are you threatening me? Lord Taoist Jinghe screamed. So what if I'm threatening you? Qin, she raised his eyebrows. Don't forget your spiritual plants are in my hands. You want medicinal pills? Fine, use your brain and solve the problem first. Lord Taoist Jinghe clenched his teeth. Brat, I asked you to learn pill concocting, but in the end, you're actually threatening me. Unfortunately, Qin, she looked indifferent and didn't even look at him. Lord Taoist Jinghe snorted angrily. Then, he suddenly thought of something and turned around to glare at Qin Shi. Didn't you say you were in a life-or-death, closed-door meditation? Why did you come out now? Qin Shi was stunned. He wanted to say something, so he moved his mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. Lord Taoist Jinghe watched Qin Shi's expression change from anger to embarrassment, so he slapped the table and laughed until he couldn't stand straight. Ha ha, brat, you're making me laugh to death. You've been in a life-or-death, closed-door meditation for 35 years. Why did you come out without saying anything? Hey, don't say this isn't called coming out. You've even left your immortal's cave and sat outside drinking tea. If this isn't called coming out, what is? Hey, what's going on? Tell Master, how did you know something happened to Tiange? Why did you suddenly come out? Qin, she didn't speak. He turned his head and looked down at Count Ants. Lord Taoist Jinghe sneakily approached him. Tell me quickly, what happened? You've been in a life-or-death, closed-door meditation for 35 years. Now that you suddenly came out, you have to tell Master, right? Tell me. Qin, she couldn't stand being pestered anymore, so he could only say, I thought something happened to Jinji. This time, even Yi Jinji, who was squatting next to him, also turned his head. With his master in front and his disciple next to him, Qin, she looked embarrassed. I felt a bad omen and thought something happened to Jinji. So, you can actually feel a bad omen. Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded seriously. It wasn't easy at all. Chapter 244. Lord Taoist Jinghe's words also had a hidden meaning. Auspicious omens were not something that just anyone could sense. If a cultivator happened to meet another cultivator on the road, would he sense whether that cultivator was going to be good or bad? Of course not. First of all, the cultivator who sensed bad or bad omens had to have a certain cultivation level. Second, there had to be some connection between them. As for what this connection was, it wasn't too particular. Generally speaking, it was a relatively intimate relationship. Lord Taoist Jinghe's words were serious, but how could Qin Shi not understand what he meant? Yi Jinji was right next to him, which made him feel even more embarrassed. Therefore, he glared at Lord Taoist Jinghe. Master, let's talk business. Are you the master, or am I the master? Lord Taoist Jinghe had a handle on Yi Jinji, so he was very calm and smiled. Your disciple is right in front of you, yet you still don't respect me. Be careful, or your disciple will learn from you and won't treat you well. However, Yi Jinji was an honest person, so he immediately said, I'll always respect Master. Lord Taoist Jinghe's smile turned into anger. Brat, go away. Yi Zhenji looked aggrieved. He looked at his master and begged, "Grandmaster, please save my aunt. If she really doesn't wake up for several decades, what if her body becomes bad?" "Oof." Lord Taoist Jinghe snorted. "Don't give me that. You two, master and disciple, one threatening and the other crying and begging. Are you bullying this old man?" She seemed to be thinking about something, but he soon calmed down. "Master, the one lying here is your disciple, not mine." "Well said." Lord Taoist Jinghe clapped his hands. "That's right. She's my disciple and your junior martial sister at most. Why are you more anxious than me? You even threatened me with medicinal pills." "Oof." She was still very calm. "Tell me, what do you want?" Lord Taoist Jinghe was proud to see him admitting defeat. He glanced at Yi Zhenji and said, "We'll talk about it later." Upon seeing Qin, she secretly heaving a sigh of relief. She leaned closer and whispered, "Rest assured, in front of your disciple, I'll save you some face." After he finished speaking, Lord Taoist Jinghe went back to check on Mo Tinga's condition. He then said solemnly, "Closing one's sea of knowledge. Basically, there's no way to get an immediate effect. However, Master knows of a kind of medicinal pill that's very helpful in this kind of situation. Even if it can't wake her up immediately, it can guarantee that her body won't be damaged." "Where's the pill formula?" Lord Taoist Jinghe reached into his chinkoan bag and fished around, taking out a large pile of jade slips. "You guys look for it. In any case, it's right here." I forgot which one it was. She helplessly glared at him, but had no choice but to start rummaging. Fortunately, there were 3 of them. There were hundreds of jade strips in the pile, so it didn't take them long to find them. However, as soon as he saw the pill recipe, his brows furrowed. These spirit herbs, that's right. Some of the spirit herbs are already very rare. It will probably take some time. But we urgently need it here. You don't have to worry about that. Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled mischievously. "Master, I have a healing technique that's useful for this kind of situation. You can use it on her once a day. At the very least, it can guarantee that there won't be any problems for several years." She was still frowning. "Where's the cultivation technique?" This time, he finally didn't take out a pile of jade strips. Instead, he threw a book made of animal skin at him. Lord Taoist Jinghe said, "Since you've come out of closed-door meditation, don't form your nascent soul for the time being. Rest for a few years first. You've been in closed-door meditation for 35 years and haven't been able to relax for even a moment. Forming your nascent soul is an extremely tiring thing, so this isn't a good opportunity. Rest well for a while and come again when you feel relaxed." She was silent, but in the end, he didn't object. If he was still in closed-door meditation, he definitely would have refused. However, given the current situation, he couldn't continue his closed-door meditation. Lord Taoist Jinghe was gratified. "That'll do. Take Tinga back to Mingxin residence and let Xiuqin and the others take care of her. Those girls have been taught a good lesson by her, so you can rest assured." She nodded and didn't say anything else. He carried Mo Tinga and walked towards Mingxin residence. Even though he hadn't returned to Mingxin residence ever since she moved into it, he was still familiar with every blade of grass and every tree here. The pond in front of the house, the medicinal field in the back. She gave the lounge to Zhenji while she lived in the cultivation room. Who said he was a cultivation maniac? In fact, she was too. Xiuqin and the others were also foundation-building cultivators. They also went to the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation today and hadn't returned yet. She carried Mo Tinga into the lounge and placed her on the bed. All of a sudden, he remembered Ruan Mingzhu, so he said, "Zhenji, go tell your grandmaster that Mingzhu also encountered some problems. Find someone to bring her back." "Oh," Yi Zhenji answered but didn't move. After a while, she finally shifted his gaze to him. "Why don't you go?" Yi Zhenji was silent for a while, then plucked up his courage to ask, "Master, what's the relationship between you and Aunt?" She was stunned. His gaze fell into the void and stopped moving. Yi Zhenji said again, "I always thought there wasn't any friendship between Master and Aunt, but it seems that's not the case just now." After a while, She finally moved the corner of his mouth and forced a smile. Don't think too much. All right, you look after your aunt. I'll go look for your grandmaster. After he finished speaking, he left Mingxin residence without looking back, as if he was escaping from something. After he left Mingxin residence, Yi Jinji said slowly, Master, I didn't say anything. Why did you? After leaving Mingxin residence, she didn't immediately go back to the main hall to look for Lord Taoist Jinghe. Instead, he sat on a railing on the side and didn't move. There were some things he always deliberately ignored, but in the end, he still couldn't ignore them. 35 years. He originally thought he'd become indifferent, and his heart couldn't hold anything else apart from forming his nascent soul. However, it wasn't until the moment he saw her that he realized he'd never forgotten. These 35 years were actually a trap he set for himself. He thought he could become indifferent, that he could still wholeheartedly cultivate like before, but in the end, he only entangled himself more and more. Or feelings. He never had a chance to understand, so he wasn't vigilant at all. In fact, he didn't even know how it started that year when he went to Demonic Mountain. He met Yihai. He deeply felt he and this person were kindred spirits, so they went through difficulties together. Later, they were trapped on Demonic Mountain for 10 whole years. The two of them met by chance and became close friends. Unfortunately, Yihai's injuries were too heavy. Seeing that he wouldn't survive, he finally died on Demonic Mountain in order to find someone for his descendant to rely on. Although he had an indifferent personality, he was never used to owing others anything. He owed Yihai half his life, so he agreed to Yihai's last wish of entrusting his daughter to him. It wasn't that he wasn't moved when he learned that the child might be a girl with a pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots, but it was only because a female cultivator with a pure Yin constitution. As long as her spiritual roots weren't too bad, she'd generally have some achievements. Besides, if she joined a cultivation group, it was very likely she'd perform dual cultivation with a sect disciple. For a cultivation group, producing one more high-level cultivator meant their strength would be stronger. But for him, this wouldn't bring him any benefits. First of all, he cultivated pure Taoist cultivation techniques. If it wasn't for Yuan Bao's trick in the virtual sky world, which gave him the pure Yang technique and transformed him infinitely close to having a pure Yang constitution, dual cultivation wouldn't bring him any benefits worth being moved by. Second, he had his own pride. Ever since he stepped on the path to immortality, he always believed he could achieve the great Tao and didn't need to rely on unorthodox methods like dual cultivation. Third, a child, an orphan entrusted to him by someone who could be considered a friend. No matter how shameless he was, he couldn't think of this aspect. After returning from Demonic Mountain, he went into closed-door meditation to heal his injuries. At the same time, he picked a trustworthy martial nephew to do things for. At that time, he wasn't really looking forward to it, because a pure Yin constitution was rare, and spiritual roots were also rare. Although the girl's father had spiritual roots, and her mother had a pure Yin constitution, it was most likely that she was an ordinary person. Who would have thought that the news brought back by that martial nephew would surprise him? It was really a child with a pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots. Moreover, she'd already embarked on the path of cultivation. But what was worse was that martial nephew messed things up again, causing that uncle and nephew to misunderstand their intentions. At that time, he thought that since that person was this child's uncle and respected his elder brother very much, he'd certainly treat this child well. Since they were worried he had bad intentions, he'd just let them be. In any case, he only wanted to return half of Yihai's life. He didn't covet anything from them. He also wasn't so enthusiastic that he still wanted to deliver himself to them after being rejected. Later, his injuries didn't heal, so he had no choice but to leave the sect to look for medicine. The reason why he went to Yunwu's sect was because although this small cultivation group wasn't well known, it had the spiritual plants he wanted. Moreover, their patriarch also passed down a rare body refining technique in Kunwu, and he happened to be collecting body refining techniques. Therefore, he decided to sneak into this small cultivation group. In any case, it was far enough from West Kunwu. Even if other people knew who Qin Shoujing was, they certainly wouldn't know who Qin she was. He was naturally quiet. Aside from cultivating, he wasn't interested in anything else. After entering Yunwu's sect, being together with a group of aura-refining disciples was really meaningless. However, since he was also an aura-refining disciple, if he didn't always hang out with them, he'd be too unsociable. The first time he saw her, he didn't recognize her as a girl. Although she was too delicate, her behavior didn't have the slightest hint of femininity. At that time, he only felt a bit curious. This child always greeted people with a smiling face and was amiable, but there was a faint pride in her eyes. This wasn't the kind of pride that came from looking down on others. Rather, it was a kind of self-confidence and self-respect. But how could a little aura-refining cultivator possibly arouse his interest? Therefore, he was only curious for a moment. Then, during the trip to Miwu Valley, they were inseparable for several days. Only then did he feel strange. He always felt there was a familiar aura on her body, as if it was something that belonged to him. When she wasn't paying attention, he probed her with his divine comprehension and discovered her secret. She turned out to be a woman. Moreover, it was a woman who wore his spirit-concealing pendant. Later, through other means, he found out that she had an uncle who was a foundation-building cultivator. At this point, he was 80% sure of her identity. So it turned out to be that girl from back then. It was really too much of a coincidence for him to meet her in such a small cultivation group. It was only then that he began to pay attention to her from time to time. As a result, he discovered that although her appearance was poles apart from his, their characters were actually surprisingly similar. She was hard-working, calm, enterprising, and decisive. These were the things he believed a successful cultivator must have. She seemed to be no different from other aura-refining disciples, but in fact, she completely fulfilled these requirements. When she looked at others, even if she was talking and laughing warmly, her eyes would still contain alienation and vigilance. She seemed to be on guard against everyone out of habit. However, when she encountered something, she was often more enthusiastic than others. She was such a contradictory person. Therefore, he thought that in the end, she was still a child and needed to be tempered. Therefore, his feelings for her didn't start from this moment. At this time, he still regarded her as a child who was struggling with contradictions, but he also felt admiration and found interesting. His feelings for her also didn't start from the 2 months he brought her back. At that time, he only sympathized with her and felt pity for her rough life. So he gave her more patience than other people. But that was all. Chapter 245. He never denied his admiration for this woman. Maybe it was because of Mingzhu, or maybe it was because of those admirers, but he never really took women seriously. He always felt that although their talents weren't inferior to men's, they often had too many messy things in their hearts. Except for a few, they weren't suitable for cultivation. However, Imo Tienga was the only one he felt was special. She was diligent. Even when her talent was extremely poor, she didn't feel remorse. Instead, she worked twice as hard as others. Even after she found out her talent was outstanding, she still didn't slack off. She was serious. Ever since he met her, he'd never seen her put her mind on other messy things. She only seriously cultivated and seriously walked her own path. She loved herself. Ever since she was a little aura-refining cultivator with nothing to her name, if she wanted to go further on the path to immortality, she always worked hard on her own and never sold her own pride and self-respect. She also had some wisdom. Although she still made mistakes and took the wrong path, she always learned from them. Ever since he met her, she was just an insignificant little cultivator in Kanwu, but she slowly grew to become a real elite disciple of a big cultivation group today. Her efforts and persistence never changed, but her experience and way of dealing with things were growing. Although he himself helped her a little, her talent and hard work were also undeniable. In fact, in a way, she was very lucky. He thought she had trash spiritual roots, but it turned out she was a genius. Moreover, she was favored by deification cultivators and obtained some rare treasures. However, her own efforts were worthy of this kind of result. In fact, which of the cultivators who could reach this far weren't the result of hard work and luck. His master could be considered unlucky. He had to rely on his own cultivation to make realm breakthroughs, but he had many rare treasures for fights of magical power, and these were also the foundation of his status. Martial Uncle Jinyang, Martial Uncle Miaoi, and Master Songfeng, who had a grudge against them. Which one of them hadn't encountered fated chances and obtained rare treasures? This included Qin Mu himself. Everyone in West Kunwu said that Qin Shoujing was a rare genius in the celestial pole, but what was the truth? He had dual spiritual roots. Even if both spiritual roots were excellent, how could he compare to those true geniuses with single spiritual roots or mutated spiritual roots? Even if he was simple-minded and never encountered bottlenecks, it was still the same. Before he built his foundation, it was indeed the result of his own efforts, but he also couldn't have done without his master's help. After reaching the foundation establishment realm, he often went out both to temper his mental state and to seek opportunities, because he felt that he could not rely on his master for the rest of his life. His luck wasn't bad, and he was also alert enough. Therefore, he smoothly encountered many fated chances and obtained many spiritual treasures, including the Yang spiritual bead and the 3 Yang real fire sword. He formed his gold core at the age of 78. Those who didn't know would be surprised that he, a cultivator with 2 spiritual roots, could reach this level. But in reality, it was because he had obtained the Yang spiritual bead. The Yang spiritual bead was a kind of unique treasure condensed from the spiritual aura of heaven and earth. In itself, it was condensed from extremely pure Yang spiritual aura. Although it was small, it had sucked dry a certain spiritual vein in Kunwu, turning it into an ordinary mountain peak without any spiritual aura at all. Then, it was buried somewhere for tens of thousands of years before he found it. Therefore, after obtaining the Yang spiritual bead, he didn't need to absorb spiritual qi from the outside world anymore, because in a way, he already had an entire spiritual vein inside his body. Such a rare treasure allowed his cultivation to advance by leaps and bounds, allowing him to smoothly advance to the core formation realm at the mere age of 78. However, if it was another person, would they definitely be able to obtain these treasures and encounter these opportunities? Sometimes, even if there were opportunities and rare treasures in front of them, those who didn't work hard still wouldn't be able to obtain them. Those who didn't know how to work hard, but were always superior to those whose cultivation levels were higher than theirs because of their natural endowments or opportunities, or those who didn't work hard because they had outstanding natural endowments, would never understand these principles. Therefore, from a certain point of view, he admired this woman because she allowed him to see himself. His master told him that opposites or similar people would easily become curious about each other, and curiosity was the first step to developing feelings for each other. He didn't believe it at first, but now he had no choice but to believe it. When did he start to see her as a woman instead of a child? Perhaps it was when he came to Xianxing school and regained his original identity, or perhaps it was during those long 35 years. He wanted to recall, but he found he couldn't remember clearly. Sometimes, he even felt that these feelings seemed to have no reason at all and suddenly arose. Because he admired her, he was curious. Because he was curious, he paid attention to her. Because he paid attention to her, he put more thoughts into his mind. When he put more thoughts into his mind, in the end, he couldn't bear to let go. Sometimes, when he carefully thought about it, perhaps it was because she had already grown up when they met, right? Their meeting was 7 years late, giving her enough time to grow up. Therefore, in the beginning, although he still thought about this child, he was very clear in his heart that she had already grown up and wasn't a child anymore. She regarded him as a cultivator in the same realm and would joke with him, share some of her experiences, and even talk about some of her worries. This kind of relaxed and pleasant feeling made him happy. The reason he subconsciously wanted to conceal his identity was also because he liked this feeling of equality between them. He always felt that if he told the truth, the distance between them would suddenly become far apart, and she would no longer have that kind of trust in him. He told Zhong Yuling that if he didn't conceal his identity, she wouldn't stay at Xianxing school. Yes, this was one of the reasons. At that time, she was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. If she knew his true identity, she probably would have tried every means to escape, right? She could trust Qin a little, but she couldn't trust Qin Shojing wholeheartedly, especially when she escaped like that back then. When he saved her during the demonic beast riot, he didn't think too much about it. In the end, did he have any extra feelings for her at that time? It seemed like too much time had passed, so he somewhat couldn't remember. However, he was certain that at that time, he didn't have any thoughts of dual cultivation. He wouldn't take a fancy to a cultivator who had just built her foundation, even if she was extraordinarily talented. A gap of more than 100 years was nothing in the eyes of cultivators, and he also wasn't related to her by blood. Even he and her father were nothing more than companions. Although they were close friends, in reality, there was still a gap of more than 100 years between them. Was it because of seniority? For cultivators, this was a problem that simply didn't exist. There was only one thing he couldn't ignore, the gap between their cultivation levels. He patiently pondered, searching for traces of the past in the depths of his heart. But he soon discovered that the reason was so simple. He wasn't a transcendent being. The utilitarian nature of cultivators was deeply buried in his bones and blood. Even if he had a good impression of her, Qin Shojing, the future hope of Xianqing School, wouldn't want to marry a woman who had just built her foundation and whose path to immortality was unknown. These are the fragments he picked up when he recalled them today. Back then, he never thought about them. Later, when he entered the virtual sky world and met those two deification cultivators, he once again suffered that kind of humiliation. He originally thought he was looking at her from a high place, so he had a bit of a good impression of her, but he couldn't convince himself to let go of his cultivation level. As it turned out, in other people's eyes, he was only a furnace. Furnace. These two words were the greatest humiliation to a man. It was even more so for Qin Shojing, who thought highly of himself and considered everyone beneath him. Therefore, he cultivated like crazy, wanted to let those two know that he, Qin Shojing, would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, even surpass them, and eventually step into the great Tao. However, his master said that he'd entered his own demonic barrier and told him to think carefully about the innocence he had when he first started cultivating. At that time, he didn't cultivate for any reason. He just wanted to cultivate, that's all. Therefore, he didn't have any encumbrances or obsessions. He just cultivated wholeheartedly. But now he didn't. These past few years, it wasn't that he didn't know his state of mind had changed. He was no longer the Qin Shojing who didn't have any extra feelings, didn't know the taste of obsessions, had a pure heart and few desires, and had a pure Tao heart. However, once he changed, how could he return to his original innocence? He tried to calm himself down, and thus he went into seclusion for 35 years. In these 35 years, he had actually fallen into the trap he set up, and in the end, he firmly trapped himself. The more he wanted to prove himself, the more he loved her in his imagination. Thus, he was plagued by obsessions, and the demonic barrier was difficult to get rid of. Today, he slowly sorted out these thoughts that he had never thought about in the past from the corners of his memories, no matter how difficult it was to speak of these thoughts of the past. He originally thought that he would be like this for the rest of his life, immersed in the Tao of immortality, lonely all his life, and finally stepping onto the supreme great Tao. Or perhaps he would truly fall in love with a woman, no matter what her identity or status was, accompanying her until the end of his life and passing away together. However, as it turned out, he wasn't as pure and simple as he thought he was, and he wasn't as noble and virtuous as he thought he was. He developed feelings for a woman, but because he was limited by his cultivation, he enjoyed the feeling of superiority from looking down on her. Because his self-esteem and this feeling of superiority had been violated, he cultivated madly so that he could look down on her again. Why'd he have such a dark mood? Perhaps it was because he couldn't let go of her, but he couldn't let go of his laughable self-esteem even more. He didn't want to admit that he was the one who had fallen in love first. Or perhaps he had always been so utilitarian, no different from those other cultivators. Master was right. He had entered the demonic barrier, thinking that if he focused on cultivating until he reached the nascent soul realm, he would be able to break away from these unspeakable darkness. But in reality, this was just putting the cart before the horse. However, even if he understood his own heart, he still wouldn't say these words now. If he said them now, how was it different from wanting to use her? If he couldn't form a nascent soul, he wanted to obtain her so that he could break away from his obsession and smoothly form a nascent soul. He didn't want to do such a lowly thing, and he wasn't even willing to have the slightest bit of relationship with her. This was the last bit of perseverance he could achieve after admitting to all his darkness. The great Tao of immortality, in the end, had to be walked by oneself. How could he place his hopes on unorthodox methods? Even if he loved her, cultivating to become an immortal was still his lifelong wish. And she, in all likelihood, wouldn't want a relationship that was mixed with utilitarian feelings. Therefore, if she loved him, if she couldn't let go, then she would wait until he formed a nascent soul and she formed a gold core. Then she would simply ask, "Are you willing to explore the Tao of immortality together?" If she was willing, then his long-cherished wish could be fulfilled. If she wasn't willing, then he wouldn't have any fate in this lifetime. Chapter 246. After an unknown period of time, the laughter of women rang out in Enchanting Palace. Several young and beautiful female building foundation realm cultivators ran over while laughing and fooling around. Just as they were about to run to Mingxin residence, they suddenly stopped in astonishment and looked at the man who was sitting on the railing, as if he had become one with the stone pillar carved with a dragon. Martial Uncle Shou Jing. Xianshu blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Daiwa exchanged a glance with her, then turned to look at Xiuqin and Qingqi. Qingqi finally moved. He swept his gaze over them and said, "Do you know what happened?" His expression was very cold. The four female cultivators were silent for a while, not daring to answer. Xiuqin said cautiously, "We heard Martial Uncle Mo had an accident inside the 10,000 laws of nature formation. Since you already know, why are you still making such a ruckus?" There was absolutely no blame in his tone, only indifference like a stone pillar. It was still the eldest of the four, Xiuqin, who said, "Yes, we will be careful in the future." He didn't say anything more. He turned his head and closed his eyes, as if he didn't want to care about anything else. Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua looked at each other, bowed, and carefully walked towards Ming Xian residence. Wait. The four of them felt their hearts skip a beat. Although Uncle Shoujing normally didn't like to smile, he was still very amiable. Today, he was truly frightening, even more frightening than their grandmaster. Xiuqin asked softly, "Martial Uncle Shoujing, do you have any other instructions?" Qin, she didn't even turn his head. He said faintly, "Mingzhu was also injured. Did you see her?" "Yes, Mame and the others are behind us. They will bring senior sister Ruan back soon." He waved his hand behind him. "You guys can go." The four of them cautiously walked towards Mingxin residence. Upon discovering that Martial Uncle Mo's formation wasn't activated, they quietly walked inside. After entering the courtyard, Xianshu whispered, "What happened to Martial Uncle Shoujing? How terrifying." "Who knew?" Qingqi frowned. Suddenly, she was surprised. Martial Uncle Shoujing appeared here. Did he come out of seclusion? Daiwa was deep in thought. Didn't they say that it was a closed-door seclusion? I thought I was seeing things. Why did Martial Uncle Shoujing come out? It's one thing for you to come out, but why are you still sitting here in a daze? Xianshu was confused. Qingqi said, "Maybe." Martial Uncle Shoujing wanted to go back to Mingxin residence, but in the end, he remembered Martial Uncle Mo was living here now. Xiuqin said, "Nonsense. Ever since Martial Uncle Shoujing moved out, how many times has he come back? Didn't you follow me to the main hall and leave after talking to Grandmaster?" "That's true." Xianshu's eyes shifted about. She then moved closer and whispered, "Did you guys hear? Today, it was Martial Uncle Shoujing who suddenly went to the bottom of the valley on the main peak and brought Martial Uncle Mo back." Daiwa cried out in alarm. Realizing that she was too loud, She hurriedly covered her mouth and whispered, I came out late. I don't know. What's going on? I don't know, said Leisure. That's all I've heard. It reminds me of a rumor from decades ago. The four of them looked at each other and knew what each other wanted to say. Qingqi rubbed her chin and said, I thought it was just a rumor. There must be a reason for the groundless rumors. Leisure smiled. We've been serving Grandmaster for almost 100 years. How can we not know about Martial Uncle Shoujing's matters? Martial Uncle Mo was accepted by Grandmaster because of Martial Uncle Shoujing. Moreover, back then, don't you think Martial Uncle Shoujing really treated her much better than other people? You're right, Daiwa said, but I still don't believe it. How could Martial Uncle Shoujing possibly? Otherwise, why would he be standing guard outside now? Think about Martial Uncle Shoujing's appearance just now. Well, have we ever seen him sitting on the railing so casually and in a daze? Leisure continued to speak in an enigmatic manner. In my opinion, that's most likely the case. Daiwa said, Aren't you thinking too much? We've been by Grandmaster's side for so many years, but when have we ever seen anyone with a more resolute Dao heart than Martial Uncle Shoujing? That's true. Leisure shook her head, overturning what she just said. In any case, it's none of our business. In the end, it was Xiuqin who spoke. Enough. Martial Uncle Shoujing just taught you a lesson, but you still have so much to say. Did he not teach you enough? Leisure hastily shut her mouth. Qingqi muttered, We just laughed a few times, but Martial Uncle Shoujing taught us that much. It's not like we didn't. Martial Uncle Mo's injured. Xiuqin stopped her from continuing. Grandmaster treats us generously, but we can't be lazy with what we should do. I heard Martial Uncle Mo's injuries are quite serious, but we're still laughing. Aren't we just looking for trouble for others? It's fine if you didn't see it, but since you said it, we should restrain ourselves a bit. The other three nodded and sighed, then followed Xiuqin back to the small house. In fact, it was no wonder they were still laughing and joking after returning. Although they knew Martial Uncle Mo was injured, her life wasn't in danger, so Grandmaster didn't take it seriously. Besides, although they didn't dare to disobey Martial Uncle Mo, they didn't have any friendship with her. However, Xiuqin's words were obviously nonsense, but the meaning behind her words was rather thought-provoking. They're happy, but others feel uncomfortable. Is it because Martial Uncle Mo's injured? The four of them couldn't help but think about this. Qingqi sat in a daze for a while. During that time, he saw Mame and the others really brought Ruan Mingzhu back. Now that the masters of Mingxin residence and Zhili House were in trouble, the maids of Shangqing Palace lamented their bad luck, but they were also helpless. Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua were the closest to Mingxin residence, so it was always the four of them who took care of all the chores in Mingxin residence. As for Zhili House, although Ruan Mingzhu hadn't been in Mount Taikong for a long time, her identity was still there, so Mei Lan, Zhu, and Zhu had no choice but to take care of her. The sex trial this time practically turned the high purity palace upside down. She couldn't sit still after being stared at by the maids with strange gazes again and again. He stood up and slowly walked toward the main hall. But as soon as he stepped into the main hall, he regretted it. There was only Lord Taoist Jinghe at the scene, seemingly waiting for him. She thought about it and didn't escape. Master! Lord Taoist Jinghe seemed a bit surprised. He glanced at Qin and said, What took you so long? I was sitting and thinking about something. Thinking about something? Lord Taoist Jinghe's eyes brightened. Thinking about what? Qin didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a chair and sat down, staring blankly again. Although he already figured out, he still wasn't used to this kind of state. His heart was full of miscellaneous things, but it turned out to be like this. In that case, sometimes women couldn't be blamed. Women were always more sentimental, and some things couldn't be controlled once they started. However, he had always been strong-willed. Since he decided to do something, he wouldn't hesitate anymore. Master, why you care so much? He said faintly. Brat. Lord Taoist Jinghe blew his beard and glared at him. How can you talk to your master like this? If I don't talk to you like this, you'll feel uncomfortable all over, right? It was rare for Lord Taoist Jinghe to be silent. He pondered for a while, then said, "Brat, you're not in the right mood today, but you still provoke me." She didn't hide it. In any case, he'd already done some things clearly enough. Rather than being laughed at by this dirty old man, he'd better be frank. Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't speak for a long time, but his eyes kept sizing him up. After a while, he smiled. "Brat, you finally figured it out?" She didn't evade. He stared at the void and said faintly, "Master, what else do you want to ask? Just say it all at once." The calmer his attitude was, the happier Lord Taoist Jinghe was. This meant this brat had made up his mind. "Tell me your plan first." He couldn't stop smiling. In fact, although there's a gap between the two of you in cultivation, it's not big. Whether it's Tianga's mental state or cultivation level, the conditions for her to form her gold core are ripe. As soon as she forms her gold core, you'll be cultivators in the same realm as her. As for you advancing to the nascent soul realm in the future, she'll just be a bit slower. You don't have to. I want to advance to the nascent soul realm. She interrupted him. Lord Taoist Jinghe was interrupted halfway, so he shouted, "What did you say? You still haven't given up? Haven't you figured it out?" She looked down at the teacup in his hand. His gaze was gentle, but his tone was firm. "I won't tell you unless I advance to the nascent soul realm." "You." Lord Taoist Jinghe almost choked. After a long time, he whispered, "What are you doing?" She said softly, "If I tell you now, what would it look like? Would I demand repayment? Or would I use my power to oppress others?" Lord Taoist Jinghe frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about? This kind of thing is consensual. If Tianga isn't willing, she can just refuse. We won't force her to do anything. But what will she think?" She lowered his head. "Yes, Master, you've had a good relationship with her all these years, but no matter how good your relationship is, she's always on guard against others in her heart. Master, she's about to form her gold core now, so you better not disturb her mood." Lord Taoist Jinghe was silent for a long time. In the end, he sighed. "But have you ever thought that if you form your nascent soul, she'll be even further away from you?" Shi's hand moved, but he didn't raise his head. Lord Taoist Jinghe continued to say, "All these years, I've more or less learned about her temperament. The pride in Tianga's heart isn't any less than yours. You don't want to use her, but isn't she the same? Therefore, the higher your cultivation level is, the further away she'll be from you." She didn't speak for a long time, but Lord Taoist Jinghe saw his hand trembling slightly. After a long time, he asked, "What do you think, Master? She'll need at least 10 or 20 years to form her gold core, right? Am I supposed to stop cultivating and wait until she catches up to me?" Lord Taoist Jinghe chuckled. "Child, are you stupid? Wait until you too succeed, then you form your nascent soul. Do you think she'll go back on her words?" She didn't nod. He seemed to be thinking. After going back and forth several times, he finally said, "Then I'll wait. In any case, she'll form her nascent soul in 200 years at most. I still have a lot of time, so I can wait slowly." Lord Taoist Jinghe choked. He didn't expect she would make such a decision in the end. But after pondering for a long time, he finally didn't object and said, "Fine, maybe this is the best way. Even if she forms her gold core now, there's still a big gap between the early stage and the peak stage of the core formation realm. But after she forms her nascent soul, she probably won't have any other ideas." At this point, Lord Taoist Jinghe looked up with an inscrutable expression. "But are you really willing to wait 200 years? Chapter 247. Yi Zhenji was very gloomy, and he couldn't describe the gloominess in his heart. He felt like he was cheated, but no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't tell where he was cheated. He just felt full of grievances and couldn't be motivated to do anything. "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you in a daze during a fight of magical power?" The youth opposite him, who was about the same age and cultivation level as him, shouted in dissatisfaction. Yi Zhenji frowned and felt impatient, so he simply abandoned his magic tool and sat on a rock next to him, lowering his head in anger. Hualing walked over and asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you? Are you in a bad mood?" Yi Zhenji frowned and said gloomily, "I'm very annoyed. Annoyed? Hualing thought for a moment, then said, Because of your aunt? Didn't Grandmaster say she's fine? What are you worried about? It's not about that. Although his aunt hadn't woken up yet, his master said she was fine, so he wasn't worried. However, seeing his master coming out of closed-door meditation and busily doing this and that, he felt annoyed. Why did he feel uncomfortable? Whether it was his master or his aunt, they were both people he respected and loved. Wasn't it better if his master treated his aunt well? Although this was what his rationality told him, he was still very unhappy. Perhaps he thought he was the closest person to them, but in the end, he was completely kept in the dark. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, whether it was when he was with his aunt, when his aunt mentioned his master, or when his master mentioned his aunt, their expressions were a bit strange. However, at that time, he didn't think there was any relationship between them. What's bothering you? Is there something you can't tell me? Yi Jinji glanced at Hualing, thought for a moment, then said, Then I'll tell you, but you mustn't tell anyone. Hualing raised his eyebrows. Of course. What's our relationship? Yi Jinji pondered in his heart, then said slowly, I suspect there's something between my aunt and my master. Oh, your aunt and your master. Ah. Hualing nodded, but halfway through his thought, he realized something was wrong and shouted. He thought for a moment, then leaned over and whispered, That's impossible, right? Don't they rarely see each other? I thought so too. Yi Jinji sat there with a distressed expression. But when my aunt had an accident in the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation, the first person she sensed was actually Master. Hualing was a bit stunned. No way. Why else would I be depressed? Yi Jinji said listlessly. Besides, after Annie had an accident, Master was so nervous, and Grandmaster said some strange things. Hualing thought for a moment, then said, Even if it's true, what's there to be depressed about? Your master and your aunt are both close to you. Isn't it good for them to be together? You can say that. In fact, Yi Jinji also didn't understand what he was feeling gloomy about. He just felt irritated, especially when he saw his master helping his aunt nourish her body with a cultivation technique every day and also searching everywhere for spiritual plants to concoct medicinal pills. Whenever he saw this, he felt very irritated and found his master very unpleasant to the eye. However, after she said that to Hualing, Hualing found it funny. Do you feel like you're being left out? Yi Jinji froze. Hualing continued. Ever since you were brought back by your aunt, whether it was with your aunt or with your master, you've always been their only disciple. They've always treated you extremely well, so you've always felt very happy because the person they value the most is you. But now, you realize that they, who you thought valued the most, are hiding such an important thing from you, which makes you feel like you're not that important. Yi Jinji frowned, but he couldn't say that Hualing was wrong. I don't know. In any case, whenever I see Master now, I feel annoyed and don't want to go back. Seeing his appearance, Hualing found it a bit funny. In fact, you're just jealous, aren't you? Yi Jinji didn't say anything. He just lowered his head and said nothing. Hualing sat down next to him and said, Do you think your master took your aunt away? Yi Jinji was silent for a while, then answered honestly, a little bit. Hualing smiled. Because you've always respected your master, so when you found out he carried you, that from the beginning to the end, he didn't ask you about it, so you suddenly felt he was very annoying, right? Without waiting for Yi Jinji's answer, Hualing already had an answer in his heart. He patted Yi Jinji's shoulder and said, Get over it. We can't meddle too much in the affairs of our elders. Besides, your master was so good to you. In all fairness, did he ever let you down? After thinking for a while, Yi Jinji answered honestly, no. Then he immediately added, But I still feel uncomfortable. Hualing shook his head. In that case, let me ask you this. If you didn't find out about this, would you want your master and your aunt to be together? This time, Yi Jinji thought for a long time. After a while, he finally said, I originally thought that since I wanted to be with both my aunt and my master, it'd be good if they lived together. But those are two different things. Hualing found it funny. You want them to live together, but you don't want them to have a special relationship because you think you're the person they care about the most, even if both of them can't take away your position, right? Besides, Are you worried that if that happened, your position in their hearts would be pushed back? Do you think you'd be redundant? Upon seeing Yi Jinji's lowered head, Hualing smiled. Brother, we're already in our 40s. Although we're cultivators and our lifespans are much longer, we're not children anymore. Why are you still so awkward? Yi Jinji glared at him and said unwillingly, You said it clearly, but where did you find out? Hualing said, Before I was 10 years old, when I was with my parents, I often thought that way. My parents had a very good relationship, so at that time, I often felt I was redundant when they were together. As he talked about his childhood, he smiled and glanced at Yi Jinji. But now that I've grown up, I feel I was really childish back then. Shouldn't I be happy that my parents had a good relationship? Their feelings for each other were different from their feelings for me. No matter how good they were, I was still the most important person to them. Yi Jinji was still full of reluctance, but he felt what Hualing said was right. So he muttered, But Master didn't even tell me. Why would he tell you about this kind of thing? Hualing looked at him in confusion. You're their junior, not their elder. How could he explain this to a junior? Yi Jinji was at a loss for words and was rendered speechless. Rationally speaking, he felt that what Hualing said was right. But emotionally speaking, he still felt very, very unhappy. Hualing patted him on the back. Brat, you're in your 40s now, not in your teens, okay? You've cultivated too much that you've become stupid, haven't you? Yi Jinji pushed his hand away. In any case, I still feel unhappy. If you're unhappy, go talk to your master. Since he'd already said it, Hualing couldn't do anything else. After thinking for a moment, he leaned closer and smiled slyly. In fact, I think you might as well find yourself a little wife. That way, someone will get tired of you, and you won't have time to be unhappy. Go away. Yi Jinji pushed him away. What nonsense are you talking about? Hualing said with a smile. This is a sincere suggestion. Although our Tao school doesn't advocate it, dual cultivation is, after all, a good thing. Look at your master. He's so old. But isn't he? My master isn't old. He's only 175 years old. Okay? He's already very young for a core formation cultivator, let alone he's about to form his nascent soul. Hualing found it even more funny. Just now, you said you didn't like your master, so why are you defending him now? Yi Jinji was speechless. Youngsters. Hualing pretended to be mature. Why are you so awkward? Yi Jinji lowered his head and didn't refute. Hualing's words made him feel a little awkward. He didn't allow others to talk about his master, but he himself didn't like his master. I reckon it's useless to say anything now. In fact, it's not that you don't understand. You're just unhappy, aren't you? Yi Jinji sighed. Yes, you're right. In fact, I have a sincere suggestion, Hualing said very seriously. And you better find yourself a little wife. Yi Jinji slapped him with his palm. Nonsense. Hualing couldn't help but laugh as he said, In fact, I think the most important thing for you is to be angry at your master. On the contrary, you're not that angry at your aunt, am I right? Nonsense. My aunt's still asleep. It's not like it has much to do with her, but didn't you say it just now? Your aunt doesn't seem to be completely innocent, right? Hualing, who was observant, smiled. Don't you think so? Your feelings for your aunt aren't ordinary. Yi Jinji understood the meaning of his words. He glared at him and said sternly, Don't talk nonsense. Aunt is my aunt. I've always regarded her as my master and respected her as an elder. I didn't mean that. Hualing hastily explained. What I meant was, ever since you were a child, your aunt has been the female elder closest to you. She also treats you very well, so you must have thought women should be like your aunt. It's also because of this that you think your master is annoying, right? Yi Jinji was stunned. He never thought about this aspect, but when he thought about it carefully, it seemed to be the case. If there was a woman, it would naturally be best if she was like his aunt. In fact, your aunt is only an image in your heart. Before you have a definite lover, you'll probably think of your aunt as an image. So in your heart, you actually regard your master as your love rival. Nonsense. Love rival or whatnot. That's too much. Hualing looked at his awkward expression and smiled. In any case, that's what I meant. It's fine as long as you understand. So I think if you find yourself a little wife, you probably won't be like this. Stop. Yi Zhenji lowered his head and said, before I form my gold core, I won't think about this nonsense. Hualing shrugged, expressing his helplessness. I didn't say you must. It was just a suggestion. In fact, it's not a big deal. Generally speaking, once you grow up, you won't feel that way anymore. You just haven't grown up yet. Get lost. Yi Zhenji was annoyed. You're the one who hasn't grown up. Chapter 248. In any case, although Yi Zhenji felt awkward, he gradually calmed down. He wasn't a child anymore. He understood some things, but he needed time to accept them. Therefore, from the time when she deliberately avoided her master to visit her aunt, she was now able to calmly accompany her master to visit her aunt. Thinking about it carefully, it was probably because he never thought his aunt would become dual cultivation partners with someone else, so he felt so uncomfortable. In fact, if he calmly thought about it, it wouldn't be bad if that person was his master. He wouldn't have any regrets if the two people closest to him were together. In addition, he secretly thought that maybe he should find some time to travel. He remembered that his aunt wasn't much older than he was now, but she was much more experienced in handling things and wouldn't have such silly thoughts as he did. Perhaps he was too inexperienced, so although he wasn't young, his thoughts were still so childish. Master! Yi Zhenji regained his composure when he saw Qin Shi coming in. Qin Shi nodded and looked at Enchanting, who was lying quietly on the bed. How's her condition today? Same as always. Not good, but not bad, Yi Zhenji said. Qin Shi walked over to her. As usual, he used his spiritual aura to examine her body. He then slowly poured the spiritual aura he'd cultivated using a secret technique into her body, tempering her body to prevent her spiritual aura from decreasing and her body from shrinking. It had been half a month, but Enchanting still showed no signs of waking up. Qin Shi, however, discovered one thing during each tempering process. He mainly practiced two cultivation techniques. The first was the art of 3 primordial cycles. He obtained this cultivation technique when he obtained the Yang spiritual bead after he built his foundation. This cultivation technique was said to be closely related to the distant past era. It was based on the 3 primordial auras of heaven and earth, which ancient cultivators believed to be the origin of heaven and earth. If the 3 auras, extreme yang, extreme yin, and neutral, could be combined into one could achieve the great Tao. This cultivation technique was suitable for realm breakthroughs, but it was harsh to practice. Now that he had extreme yang and neutral auras, he only lacked extreme yin. The other cultivation technique was the pure yang technique Yuan Bao gave him. Because he had the yang spiritual bead, he had an endless supply of yang spiritual aura. Now the pure yang technique had reached the initial stage. The originally weak yin spiritual aura in his body had long disappeared, leaving only pure yang spiritual aura. Every time he poured his pure yang aura into Enchanting's body, he discovered that his spiritual aura and Enchanting's yin spiritual aura were mutually attracted to each other. It was almost impossible to separate them. Now that she was unconscious, she was naturally unable to control her own spiritual aura. Therefore, the attraction between the 2 spiritual auras was completely instinctive. What was even more miraculous was that every time he finished tempering her body, he would discover that he didn't use up any spiritual energy at all. In fact, it was even slightly more than before. Logically speaking, this kind of situation shouldn't exist. Spirit Qi didn't increase out of thin air. Using Spirit Qi to heal people would only result in a loss, not an increase. However, this kind of situation had indeed happened. He thought about it for a few days, but in the end, he still couldn't figure it out. He furrowed his brows, but from the corner of his eye, he saw Zhenji sitting listlessly on the side. So he asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Zhenji raised his head and glanced at her numbly before he lowered his head again. "It's nothing." Qin Shi thought for a moment, then asked, "You haven't been very happy lately. It's not just because of your aunt, right?" Upon hearing what he said, Yi Zhenji became even more dejected. Master already knows? Upon seeing his appearance, she couldn't help but laugh. He walked to Yi Xinji's side and sat down, then reached out to stroke his head, causing Yi Xinji to shout, "Master, I'm not a child anymore." She laughed even harder. "Although you're no longer a child, you still have a child's temperament." Upon hearing what he said, Yi Xinji lowered his head and remained silent. She sighed. "Master knows you're feeling uncomfortable, but there's no reason for a master to explain himself to his disciple. If you want to know, you can come and ask me." "Why didn't you ask?" Yi Xinji lowered his head even more. He naturally knew he was in the wrong. A master and disciple were like father and son. His master usually treated him very well, but a master was still a master. He couldn't be rude to him. "You're not going to ask me now? If you're not going to ask me, I'm going to leave." "Master." Yi Xinji raised his head. Upon seeing Qi's smiling appearance, he knew he was fooled. He felt annoyed and said, "Master, you're teasing me on purpose." She smiled even more happily. He patted Yi Xinji's shoulder and said, "Brat, is there anything you can't say? Are you afraid Master will blame you? Or are you blaming Master?" Yi Xinji scratched his head and said somewhat embarrassedly, "I think there's nothing to say." Hualing said, "I'm just jealous, and I'll be fine after a while." "And it seems you've already thought about solving it yourself." She was very gratified. "But you won't be reconciled if you don't ask about some things, right?" Yi Xinji nodded honestly. I actually mind, but after thinking about it, I think Master isn't wrong. I'm too petty." "This isn't petty, it's about feelings." She smiled. "The fact that you feel awkward shows that whether it's your aunt or your master, you have true feelings for them. However, there are some things Master can't tell you right now. You can ask me after you figure it out, okay?" How could Yi Xinji have the nerve to say no? There was no reason for a master to explain this kind of thing to his disciple. It was already good enough for his master to talk to him in such a good tone, because he was afraid he'd feel depressed. "I understand, Master." "Good. You can continue to look after your aunt here. When you leave, let Shou Qin and the others guard her." "Oh," Yi Xinji answered, then asked, "Master, are you going to leave now?" She smiled and said slowly, "Your Grandmaster found several pill recipes. Maybe they can help your aunt wake up sooner. However, the spiritual medicines on these pill recipes are very rare. In a few days, I'll go out to try my luck, so I have to go back and prepare." "Ah, Master, you're going out?" Yi Xinji looked at him, then at the sleeping Imo Tinga on the bed. "What about my aunt?" She said, "With your Grandmaster here, what's there to be afraid of?" He then warned, "When I'm not here, you have to take good care of your aunt. Don't think about trivial things. If there's anything, just look for your Grandmaster, understand?" Yi Xinji pondered for a moment, then swallowed his words of wanting to go with them. His aunt was like this now, and his master was going out to look for medicine. He'd better not cause trouble and wait for his aunt to get better before going out to travel. After watching his master go out, he continued to sit and think with a heavy heart. She walked out of Mingxin residence and went to Zhili house first. Even though he had long been displeased with Ruan Mingzhu, they were still playmates who grew up together and had a very good relationship when they were young. The four people taking care of Ruan Mingzhu were Mei, Lan, Zhuju. The four of them weren't very happy about this task, so they were listless. When they saw him coming, they raised their spirits and saluted him. "Martial Uncle Shoujing." She nodded, then asked, "How's Mingzhu?" Ma Mei answered, "Senior Martial Sister Ruan's fine, but she hasn't been answering. She doesn't answer anything I ask. I don't know what she's muttering. Has she regained her consciousness?" "This." Ma Mei thought about it, then answered, "We can't tell." Grandmaster came and said, "Senior Martial Sister Ruan's 5 confusions plaguing spirit has entered a demonic nightmare. Maybe she understands in her heart, but she's just unwilling to face it. Maybe she's still muddle-headed and can't distinguish between people and things." She frowned and looked at Ruan Mingzhu, who was sitting on a stool, staring blankly at the corner as if she didn't hear them or notice his arrival. He walked over, then called out, "Mingzhu." Ruan Mingzhu didn't move. It seemed she couldn't hear him at all, but she was mumbling something. Mame moved closer and listened for a while, then said, Marshal Uncle Shojing, Senior Marshal Sister Ruan is saying she's not Ruan Mingzhu. Qin, she was stunned. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he looked at Ruan Mingzhu again, his heart softened a bit. In the beginning, Mingzhu was a very cute little girl. In his boring childhood, the only joy he had was given to him by Mingzhu, so it wasn't like he didn't feel grateful towards her. It was just that later, Mingzhu became more and more ruthless and strange, so the distance between the two of them grew further and further apart. Mingzhu couldn't be blamed for what happened this time. The 5 confusions plaguing spirit itself was a test to lose one's mind. At that time, Ruan Mingzhu hallucinated and did such an outrageous thing. From the perspective of a test, it wasn't wrong. The 5 confusions plaguing spirit originally made people see things they either yearned for or hated. It was just that Mo Tinga happened to appear next to her, which led to this result. Afterward, Master also secretly said that Mingzhu kept saying she didn't want to be Ruan Mingzhu and that she wasn't Ruan Mingzhu. Perhaps the weakness in her mental state was triggered. As for what exactly had happened in the 10,000 laws of nature formation, they were also gradually able to find out. Maybe it was because she knew she did a lot of things wrong, but she didn't have the courage to face them, so she wanted a new identity. She didn't want to kill Mo Tinga out of jealousy and hatred. She just envied Mo Tinga's identity and everything she had, so she wanted to become Mo Tinga. She wanted to start everything anew, to go back to the time when Ruan Mingzhu's mistakes never started. It wasn't like Master didn't feel remorseful when Mingzhu became like this. He said he also had to take responsibility for her becoming like this, but Mingzhu had to bear the consequences alone. He didn't let Mingzhu cultivate a strong heart, but he made her bear the consequences of all her mistakes. She couldn't bear it anymore, so now she completely collapsed. If it was someone else, Qin, she felt he could harden his heart and take responsibility for his own life. Besides, it wasn't like they didn't give her a chance. But this person was Mingzhu, so he couldn't bear it. For so many years, he watched step by step as Mingzhu turned from a somewhat mischievous, somewhat delicate, but also kind and adorable little girl into the person she was today. Looking at her today and recalling her initial appearance, how could he be heartless? If at that time they didn't let her stay in the branch courtyard alone for 60 years and instead patiently taught her, would she have become like this? If they gave her a bit more love and care when she came back, would she have fallen into this situation? Unfortunately, there weren't so many ifs in this world. Senior Marshal Brother, Ruan Mingzhu suddenly raised her head and smiled at him. Did you come see me? Such a pleasant voice didn't belong to the ruthless Ruan Mingzhu. Qin, she stared at her. For a moment, he couldn't tell whether she had regained her sanity or not. Ruan Mingzhu smiled again. She clapped her hands and pointed at the courtyard gate. Senior Marshal Brother, let's go to the back of the mountain. Last time, you said you'd catch an inferno beast for me. Catching an inferno beast for her, that was something they said and did when they were only 13 or 14 years old. Could it be that she'd forgotten everything that happened all these years? Qin, she looked around. Mei Lan, Zhu Ju, and the others surrounded them. So he asked, Mingzhu, do you recognize us? Ruan Mingzhu shook her head. Confusion appeared in her eyes again. No, you're not my senior marshal brother. You're Grandmaster. She then smiled and pulled Qin Shi's sleeve. Grandmaster, I want an inferno beast. Senior Marshal Brother said he'd give me an inferno beast. Chapter 249. Ruan Mingzhu didn't wake up in the end. With a heavy heart, Qin, she left Zhili House and went to the main hall to look for Lord Taoist Jinghe. Lord Taoist Jinghe was sitting cross-legged on his dragon chair, flipping through stacks of books and jade slips. When he saw Qin, she coming out, he only looked up. You're so fast today. Qin, she didn't answer. He sat not far from him, picked up a few books, and flipped through them. He asked, Master, what else are you looking for? Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't look up. He just rummaged and said, I'm looking for a way to save Mingzhu. After a while, seeing that Qin, she didn't answer and just sat there with a distracted look, he couldn't help but say, you should also think of a way. You can't just ignore her. She regained his composure and said, Master, I have a suggestion. Why don't we give Mingzhu to Senior Marshal Brother Xianin? Lord Taoist Jinghe looked up at him and raised his eyebrows. She said slowly, Mingzhu's state of mind has collapsed. I think it's all because she relies on us too much. If we give her to Senior Marshal Brother Xianin, who has a lot of disciples, maybe she can experience a different life. Lord Taoist Jinghe stroked his beard and pondered for a long time. He said, What you said isn't unreasonable. She continued. Master always takes Mingzhu with him, so her status is far more honorable than ordinary disciples. This allows her to obtain more things than ordinary disciples, but it also makes her lose the opportunity to learn from cultivators in the same realm as her. Right now, Senior Marshal Brother Xuanin's disciples are still in the foundation building realm, so it's the same for Mingzhu. Maybe she can learn something from them. But Lord Taoist Jinghe was a bit hesitant. The disciple Mingzhu injured was Xuanin's disciple. Will they be dissatisfied? They'll certainly be dissatisfied, she said, but Senior Marshal Brother Xianin has always been fair, and Xingyu and Fengxue have good temperaments. As for Wei Jiaxi, she's also not a bad person. If Master personally told them, they won't make things difficult for Mingzhu, even if they're dissatisfied. After a short pause, she added, Besides, it's also good to let Mingzhu experience the cold treatment of ordinary disciples. Now that she's forgotten everything, if she can start anew like an ordinary disciple, perhaps she won't develop the temperament she had back then. When Lord Taoist Jinghe heard what she said, he lowered his head and pondered. He was initially thinking about how to let Mingzhu regain her consciousness, but from the looks of it, it seemed like he could nurture her personality again. What you said is quite right. Lord Taoist Jinghe pondered. If she regains her consciousness, Mingzhu's collapsed state of mind won't be able to be restored to its original state. It'd be better for her to start all over again. That's exactly what I was thinking. She paused for a moment, then brought up another matter. Master, there's something very strange. I don't know if you know the reason. What? I discovered that when I heal Tiange, my spiritual aura actually doesn't decrease. Instead, it increases. Upon hearing what he said, the absent-minded Lord Taoist Jinghe regained his train of thought. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. Really? Yes. She nodded. It's always been like this these past few days. I've tried so many times, but there's never been an exception. This was obviously against common sense. Lord Taoist Jinghe stretched out his hand. Let me see. She extended his right hand. Lord Taoist Jinghe felt Shi's pulse and poured his spiritual aura into Shi's body. After a while, a frown appeared on his face. Seeing his expression, she couldn't help but ask, Master, is there something wrong? After a long time, Lord Taoist Jinghe finally let go of Shi's hand and shook his head. Haven't you noticed that there's a small circulation in your body? She was stunned. He raised his hand to move his spiritual aura. Warm yang spiritual aura ran through his meridians, reached his dantian, and flowed out of his dantian. No, there was a strand of extremely pure yin spiritual aura in his yang spiritual aura. It mixed with the neutralizing aura stored in the depths of his dantian and circulated in a corner of his dantian. This strand of yin spiritual aura was different from the yin spiritual aura he had before he started cultivating the pure yang technique. At that time, his yin spiritual aura was also impure. It mixed with his yang spiritual aura and was difficult to distinguish. However, this strand of yin spiritual aura was extremely pure without any impurities. It mixed with his yang spiritual aura and neutralizing aura, but they were also clearly separated and circulated with each other. After a while, he stopped cultivating and said, I couldn't find the extreme yin aura, so I suppressed the neutralizing aura in the depths of my dantian. I didn't expect there would be such a change. Master? Lord Taoist Jinghe was an experienced and knowledgeable middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. In just a short while, he already had an idea. He stroked his short beard and said slowly, "Do you remember the characteristics of Tienga's art of the origin?" Qin, she was stunned. He said, "The art of the origin is cultivated by people with balanced spiritual roots of the five elements. Its concept is the primordial chaos. The five elements reinforce and counteract each other, and yin and yang circulate back and forth, reaching an endless state." Correct. Mo. Tienga naturally couldn't hide this part of the cultivation technique from Lord Taoist Jinghe, so both of them knew what kind of cultivation technique the art of the origin was. Lord Taoist Jinghe stroked his beard and said, "The five elements circulation of Yin's spiritual aura is inside Tienga's body. This kind of cultivation technique is originally completely different from the one you cultivate. Your two spiritual roots of metal and fire are excellent, and you've been cultivating fire techniques since you were young. In addition, you refine the yang spiritual bead, so the yang aura inside your body is extremely abundant. What you seek is purity. Unfortunately, you cultivate the art of 3 primordial cycles. It's not a big deal if the two auras of extreme yang and neutralizing yang are together, but with the addition of extreme yin aura, it's also a kind of circulation." Qin, she frowned. After thinking for a long time, he said, "Master, what you want to say is that my art of 3 primordial cycles is actually similar to the art of the origin." Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded. "That's my guess. It's just that hers is the circulation of the 5 elements, but yours is the circulation of yin and yang. After you turned into a pure yang body, the neutralizing aura was suppressed in the depths of your dantian. You also didn't obtain extreme yin aura, so the art of 3 primordial cycles almost lost its effectiveness. These days, when you treated Tienga's injuries, you obtained pure yin spiritual aura from her, so your art of 3 primordial cycles started to really operate." Qin, she lowered his head and thought for a while, but he was shocked. "Master, according to what you said, this art of 3 primordial cycles can form a small primal chaos inside my body, and from then on, spiritual aura will grow and multiply endlessly." Lord Taoist Jinghe shook his head. "This is only Master's guess. I can't answer you right now. If you want to know, you can only verify it yourself." Qin, she didn't say anything for a long time. His expression was very solemn. If what his master said was true, it would be a huge change for his cultivation life. If the art of 3 primordial cycles could be used like this, then he'd always been on the wrong path in cultivating this cultivation technique. He originally thought whether it was his spiritual aura or his constitution, what he pursued was purity. As it turned out, above purity, there was also balance and circulation. As Lord Taoist Jinghe thought about it, he suddenly laughed. "I really didn't expect this. If that's the case, you and Tienga are really a match made in heaven. I've seen her cultivation technique. The so-called art of the origin is originally the cycle of the 5 elements and the alternation of yin and yang to form the primal chaos inside the body. However, she has a pure yin constitution, so she can only cultivate the balance of the 5 elements of yin spiritual aura. As for you, the art of 3 primordial cycles only lacks the Tai Yin Qi. Without the Tai Yin Qi, you have never been able to cultivate this cultivation technique. Moreover, you have been transformed into a pure yang body, unable to cultivate the Tai Yin Qi. If the two of you perform dual cultivation, Tienga can obtain the pure yang aura from you. At that time, she'll be able to cultivate the real art of the origin, and after your art of 3 primordial cycles obtains her extreme yin aura, you'll be able to form the state of 3 primordial cycles. Ha 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 ha. This is more suitable than performing dual cultivation with pure yang and pure yin constitutions." Lord Taoist Jinghe saw that Qin, she looked unhappy, so he asked, "What's wrong? Is this not good?" After a long time, Qin, she shook his head. "I don't want to have anything to do with cultivation. If it was just for cultivation, why would he wait until now?" Master had long said that the most convenient way for him to obtain the extreme yin aura was to perform dual cultivation with her, but he had always been unwilling to do so because he didn't want dual cultivation to be too utilitarian. Hey, Lord Taoist Jinghe frowned and looked at him disapprovingly. Aren't you thinking too much? Why must we avoid the benefits of dual cultivation? Isn't it good to do things that are beneficial to both of us? She lowered his head and didn't speak for a long time. Lord Taoist Jinghe couldn't help but say, Hey, why aren't you speaking? I really don't understand. Other people can't wait for more benefits from dual cultivation, but you're so unwilling. She said hesitantly. If that's the case, I always feel like I'm using her. What use? Lord Taoist Jinghe shouted. Child, what's wrong with your brain? This is a side benefit. Do you understand? Do you deny the feelings between you because of the benefits of dual cultivation? She showed a bitter smile. Master, do you think she has feelings for me? This question made Lord Taoist Jinghe hesitate for a long time. Well, she probably does. I really don't believe she doesn't. But I also don't believe she does. She lowered his head and smiled self-mockingly. When I brought her back from East Kunwu, I saw that she was moved on the way, but I deliberately avoided her. She's also a smart person. She didn't take advantage of the opportunity to get close to me when we were alone. Instead, she controlled herself and kept her distance. It was precisely because of this that I thought highly of her. Now that 30 or 40 years have passed, how many chances do we have to see each other? Even if she was moved at that time, I'm afraid she's already forgotten about it, right? But it's not like she doesn't care about you. Besides, she interrupted him and continued, How can I explain my identity? Until now, I've never told her that she is Qin Shoujing. She has a good impression of Shi. First, when her second uncle passed away, I accompanied her for 2 months and saved her from a difficult situation. Second, she thinks I'm a cultivator in the same realm as her, and we're equals. Master, you also know how strong her self-esteem is. If she knows the truth, will she be willing to take another step closer to me? Seeing that Lord Taoist Jinghe was also speechless, she could only show a bitter smile. Fine, let's take a step back and think about it. She still has feelings for me, but are these feelings enough for her to forgive my deceit? Although I've never wronged her, I can't calmly explain this matter. He sighed and said, feelings that might not necessarily still exist, concealing my identity and the benefits of dual cultivation I just mentioned. With so many things piled together, I really can't predict how she'll react. Chapter 250. Tinga felt like she was dreaming, but she also felt like everything was real. In this dream, she was a small ball of white light roaming in the boundless sea of clouds. She felt very happy, because in this sea of clouds, she was free and unrestrained. But not long after, she became very depressed, because she could not swim through this sea of clouds. In the beginning, her whiteness was thin and carried a kind of transparent coldness. Before long, however, a warm current often entered her body, giving her whiteness a warm layer of red. This warmth brought about many changes to her. She found that she became stronger, and the speed at which she roamed in the sea of clouds became faster and faster. Later, she found that the sea of clouds also became very strange. Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, rain scattered, and clouds gathered. But not long after, this warmth disappeared, and the previous warmth also dispersed bit by bit. She fell into a real dream. Tinga, quickly call your father to come back for dinner. Oh, okay. The little girl who was doing her homework on the table jumped up and shouted, Mother, I want to eat fish balls. Is there any today? Yes, of course there is. A smiling voice said, There's anything you want to eat. Quickly call your father to come back for dinner. Father. All her regrets started when she lost her father. Therefore, in the depths of her heart, she always fantasized over and over again about what would have happened if her father was here. Would she have had a perfect life? Although she vaguely knew this, she didn't expect it to be so serious. Even though she was now an advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul cultivator, had great talents, and possessed many things that others didn't, she still couldn't make up for the regrets in her heart. In the 10,000 laws of nature formation, when she used the 5 hindrances overturning senses, she finally understood what kind of weakness her mental state had. It wasn't that her heart wasn't strong, her willpower wasn't strong, and her Tao heart wasn't firm, but the regrets of her childhood had always been buried in the depths of her heart. In fact, if she had a father, would her life really be perfect? Her father was a core formation cultivator and a famous cultivator in West Kunwu, but her mother was immortal. Even if her father really loved her mother back then, it couldn't have been a perfect and happy family. How could a mortal marry a core formation cultivator and live a happy life? When they were in the secular world, they were indeed a loving husband and wife, but when they went to Kunwu, they certainly wouldn't be happy. Mother would be looked down upon, no matter how well father treated her. And because her mother was immortal, she would also be looked down upon. Furthermore, as a mortal, his mother only had a lifespan of 100 years, a short dozen years of youth. As a core formation cultivator, his father could live for 500 to 600 years, or even 700 to 800 years. Furthermore, she possessed the pure Yin constitution, but had no spiritual roots. Her mother was destined to live for only a little more than 20 years. Even if she had a father, she would lose her mother. Even if she hadn't wandered around for more than 10 years, she wouldn't have been able to avoid all the suffering. In the dream, Enchanting saw herself obtaining her father but losing her mother. She finally understood this truth. In one's life, one may be able to avoid many misfortunes, but it is impossible to make up for all regrets. On the path of seeking immortality, one must understand this principle. Rejoice when you gain, and don't mourn when you lose, because you will always lose something. It's better to rejoice in every possession. She opened her eyes and woke from the long dream. She was at peace. Auntie, Yizhenji's voice was filled with disbelief and joy. Auntie, you're finally awake. Seeing his excited appearance, Enchanting raised the corner of her mouth and chuckled softly. You? She hadn't spoken for a long time, so her voice was hoarse. Oh, Auntie, drink some water. Yizhenji hastily poured some tea and helped her up. Enchanting drank the water in one gulp, then said with a smile, It's not like I can't move. You don't have to do this. In fact, her body was full of spiritual aura now, so she was very energetic. Yizhenji didn't care and continued to ask, Auntie, how are you now? Are you all right? Wait, I'll go call Grandmaster. As he spoke, he rushed out of the room. Enchanting couldn't stop him no matter how hard she tried. Enchanting had no choice but to shake her head and climb out of bed. She remembered what happened before she fainted, but she didn't know how long she had been unconscious. 3 days? 5 days? However, this matter was a blessing in disguise. If it weren't for this, she might have unconsciously entered closed-door meditation to form her gold core, and problems would have arisen. Even though a foundation-building cultivator's body didn't have any impurities and wouldn't produce filth, sleeping for such a long time still felt very uncomfortable. Enchanting went to wash her face and saw Yizhenji hurriedly coming in with Lord Taoist Jinghe. Master, Lord Taoist Jinghe looked solemn. He nodded, then pulled her wrist to examine her meridians. After a while, Lord Taoist Jinghe let go of her and said with a gentle expression, You're all right in the end. Enchanting was confused. Master, what are you doing? What could possibly happen to me? Since she wasn't injured by Wan Mingzhu, her divine comprehension must have just been attacked. There was only be so nervous, right? Upon hearing what she said, Lord Taoist Jinghe pointed at her and said, Girl, you're really reckless. What could possibly happen to you? If you woke up a bit later, something would have definitely happened. Enchanting became even more confused. Yizhenji said, Auntie, do you know how long you've been unconscious? Has it been a long time? It's been 3 years. Yizhenji couldn't help but shout, Auntie, you've been unconscious for 3 years. Enchanting was stunned. That long? For her, it was nothing but a dream, but 3 years had actually passed by. Lord Taoist Jinghe said, "All right, I see you're very well. If you have any questions, ask Shinji." He then waved his sleeves and left. Mo Tiange felt something was wrong. With Lord Taoist Jinghe's temperament, there was no reason for him to be so calm, right? She thought about it, then asked Yi Jinji, "What's going on with your grandmaster? Why does he seem unhappy?" Yi Jinji said, "Maybe it's because master hasn't returned yet." Mo Tiange was stunned. "Your master hasn't returned? What happened in the past 3 years?" "In Andy, after your accident, master came out of closed-door meditation. Grandmaster said Auntie closed your sea of knowledge and won't wake up for a while. In order to concoct medicinal pills for you and help you wake up, master went out to look for medicine." After a while, Yi Jinji still didn't see any reaction from Mo Tiange, so he couldn't help but call out, "Auntie?" "Huh?" Mo Tiange woke up with a start. Yi Jinji was full of questions. "What's wrong with you?" "It's nothing." She suppressed her chaotic mood and showed a smile. "Jinji, what happened in the past 3 years? Take your time and tell me." "Oh, okay." She only remembered Ruan Mingzhu fell into a demonic barrier and wanted to hurt her. When she was under the 5 confusions plaguing spirit, she only had a bit of spiritual aura left to block Ruan Mingzhu. When the two of them were in a deadlock, they somehow triggered the formation. Mo Tiange didn't remember what happened after that. Now that she heard from Yi Jinji, she realized it was because her divine comprehension was overstimulated and she closed her divine sense. When Yi Jinji said "Qin," she brought her back to heal her injuries. Mo Tiange frowned. "How did your master know I was injured?" Yi Jinji cautiously looked at her, then said, "Master sensed an omen." Mo Tiange stared ahead and didn't say anything for a long time. "Auntie," Yi Jinji looked at her expression and couldn't figure out what she was thinking. Mo Tiange regained her composure and forced a smile. "What's wrong?" "Auntie, what are you thinking about?" "Nothing." Her expression was flat. "What else?" "Continue." And Yi Jinji continued to speak slowly. "Grandmaster said you closed your sea of knowledge on your own. You weren't injured, but you didn't know when you'd wake up. Master said you'd be fine if you were in a coma for a short time. But if you were in a coma for a long time, your body might wither, so Grandmaster had to think of a way. Later, Grandmaster took out a set of techniques and let Master practice it. Every day, he used spiritual aura to refine Andy's body. A few days later, Grandmaster found several pill recipes and said they could help Andy wake up faster. However, many of the spiritual plants on these pill recipes were very rare, so Master left the mountain to look for them soon. What about now? Yi Jinji glanced at Mo Tiange. Seeing her calm expression, he was puzzled, but he didn't have the courage to ask, so he continued to speak. Once Master left the mountain, he didn't come back. He only occasionally sent letters and sent back medicinal pills he refined. Grandmaster personally refined Annie's body. No wonder after 3 years. Not only was there nothing wrong with her body, but her spiritual aura was also a lot more abundant. It turned out there was such a reason. Why didn't your master come back? Master hasn't been able to find the materials for the most important pill recipes, so he hasn't come back. Yi Jinji hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he held back his words. He was a bit angry. Although he'd long stopped being angry with Master, he was still reluctant to speak up for him. In other words, your master hasn't formed his nascent soul all these years? Yi Jinji shook his head. Master originally planned to enter closed-door meditation, but who knew something would happen to Annie? "Auntie, what's wrong?" Mo Tiange felt very uncomfortable, so she changed the subject. "What about Ruan Mingzhu? How is she?" "Senior Marshal Sister Ruan," Yi Jinji said, "she's fine, but she seems to have been too stimulated in the formation and forgot a lot of things." "Really?" Mo Tiange said faintly. She didn't like or hate Ruan Mingzhu. She didn't like Ruan Mingzhu's character. As for what happened in the formation, Ruan Mingzhu couldn't be blamed entirely. She was also unlucky to actually run into Ruan Mingzhu, who had entered a demonic barrier at that time. Now Grandmaster sent Senior Marshal Sister Ruan to Sweet Dew Peak. Grandmaster said if Senior Martial Sister Ruan stayed with Grandmaster Xuanin's disciples, she might feel better. After he finished speaking, Yi Jinji noticed that her expression was still calm, so he couldn't help but ask, "Auntie, don't you have any thoughts?" "Thoughts? What thoughts?" Emo Tienga remained calm as she stood up to pour tea. Yi Jinji also couldn't say it, but he felt that her reaction shouldn't be like this. How should he put it? If Annie really had something towards Master, she shouldn't be this calm, right? If there was nothing, shouldn't she be surprised by Master's attitude? Yi Jinji looked up and was about to say something, but he suddenly noticed that the table was full of tea. "Auntie, the water poured out." "Oh." Emo Tienga regained her train of thought. She forced a smile, then took a handkerchief to wipe her hands. Yi Jinji realized something, but he didn't want to ask, so he just said, "Auntie, you rest first. I'll go send a message to Master." Chapter 251. After Yi Jinji left, Emo Tienga stared blankly at the tea that flowed all over the floor, speechless for a long time. For a moment, she felt her mind was a mess. She couldn't tell what she was thinking about. After a long time, she waved her sleeve and cast a small spell, making the water stains slowly disappear. 3 years. She was actually in a coma for 3 years. If her body hadn't been tempered for a long time, as Jinji said, she really wouldn't believe she'd actually been in a coma for 3 years. 3 years was like a dream. She understood the principle of being happy when you gain something, but not sad when you lose something. She didn't expect that what awaited her was actually this kind of news. When she woke up, her heart was calm and happy. Now that she saw through the flaw in her mental state, she was ready to enter closed-door meditation to form her gold core. Unexpectedly, Jinji said this to her. She didn't know what she should or could think about. In the end, she simply didn't think about anything. She returned to her cultivation room, entered the virtual sky world, and continued to meditate. Spiritual aura flowed through her meridians and converged into her dantian. What made Emo Tienga feel strange was that there was a trace of strange warm spiritual aura in the depths of her dantian. Indeed, this trace of spiritual aura was warm and bright, but because her spiritual aura was originally cold, it became warm. She tried to control this strange spiritual aura, only to discover that this spiritual aura was uncontrollably entangled with her spiritual aura, slowly mixing into a ball. She wanted to stop, but she couldn't control it. Finally, this spiritual aura and spiritual aura completely converged, forming a cycle, alternating endlessly. Time is constant, space is balance. Heaven and earth are divided into yin and yang, containing the 5 elements. Metal with extreme yin is sharp, which is urge. Metal with extreme yang is thunder, which is lead. Wood with extreme yin produces essence, which is spirit. Wood with extreme yang drives away evil, which is break. Wood with extreme yin produces essence, which is spirit. Wood with extreme yang drives away evil, which is break. Fire with extreme yin gathers souls, which is hell. Fire with extreme yang is immortal, which is nirvana. Earth with extreme yin is immortal, which is secluded. Earth with extreme yang is firm, which is unbreakable. The Taiyuan records incantation involuntarily appeared in her heart. The 5 elements of spiritual energy in her body and that strange spiritual energy formed a spiritual ball, one bright and one dark, just like a Tai Chi diagram. The 5 elements were interlinked, bright and dark alternating, opposing each other, but also blending with each other. There was me and you and me. The gold chi was driven and guided. The wood chi was spiritually broken, and the water chi was strange and illusory. Every kind of spirit chi had 2 forms. Emo Tienga was startled and slowly opened her eyes. She understood that light and darkness were yin and yang. That small ball of spiritual energy contained both yin and yang, reaching the true realm of origin. The thing that brought about this change was the spiritual aura that made her feel warm. Obviously, this was the yang spiritual aura. Ever since she started cultivating, due to her pure yin constitution, when she absorbed spiritual energy, yang spiritual energy was automatically expelled from her body. Only yin spiritual energy could enter her body. Even if other people poured their spiritual aura into her meridians, the yang spiritual aura and the mixed spiritual aura would also be quickly expelled. Because of that, for a long time, she didn't know what it felt like to have yang spiritual aura inside her body. This yang spiritual aura was obviously not ordinary yang spiritual aura. It condensed and didn't disperse. It gathered and took shape. It was pure and without a trace of impurities. Although it was only a trace, it was extremely stable and firm. It took root in her body and mixed with her yin spiritual aura, unable to be separated. Where did it come from? Mo Tienga frowned and pondered carefully. Jinji said when she was unconscious, there were two people who tempered her body. Could it be? With that thought in mind, she flung her sleeves, left the virtual sky world, and went straight to the main hall of Shanqing Palace. Master, Lord Daoist Jinghe was sitting on his dragon throne. He wasn't meditating or studying any spells, nor was he joking with the maids. Instead, he was drinking wine alone with a frown on his face. Mo Tienga originally wanted to ask him something, but judging from his appearance, she couldn't get anything out of him. So she slowly approached him and called out, Master. Lord Daoist Jinghe finished a cup of wine and glanced at her with drunken eyes. En, why didn't you properly adjust your breath? Has your body adapted to the current situation? En, I do have some things I want to ask, Master. Mo Tienga paused for a moment, then asked, Master, what's wrong with you? Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned and shook his head. Let's talk about your situation first. I didn't see any abnormalities in the spiritual aura inside your body. How do you feel? Is there any problem? The problem is no, Mo Tienga said. It's just that I found a massive spiritual aura inside my dantian, and this massive spiritual aura is very strange. Oh, Lord Daoist Jinghe raised his eyebrows. Strange in what way? Mo Tienga pondered, then said, Master, although I have the spiritual root to the origin, I have a pure yin constitution. There's only yin in my body, but no yang, so I can only cultivate the small origin with yin spiritual aura, but I can't cultivate the primal chaos with the balance of yin and yang and the cycle of the five elements. But now, I found a mass of spiritual aura inside my body. This mass of spiritual aura blended perfectly with my yin spiritual aura, forming an alternating situation. I observed it for a while and found that after it blended with that mass of spiritual aura, it had two forms of the five elements, so I deduced that it should be yang spiritual aura. Lord Daoist Jinghe's eyes flashed when he heard that. After you blended with that mass of spiritual aura, were there any abnormalities? No, Tienga said. I pondered it for a long time and found that this is the real primal chaos. If I want to cultivate the art of the origin to the extreme, this will be the realm I'll reach. Upon seeing the faint smile on Lord Daoist Jinghe's face, Mo Tienga was bewildered. Master, where did this mass of yang spiritual aura inside my body come from? Jinji said that when I was unconscious, you and senior martial brother Shoujing temper my body. Could it be that you? Lord Daoist Jinghe poured a cup of wine and smiled, but he didn't answer. Mo Tienga waited for a while and couldn't help but ask again, Master. Lord Daoist Jinghe drank the cup of wine and said, Tienga, Master wants to tell you something. You have to be mentally prepared. Mo Tienga frowned. Master, what's so important that he's so cautious? Don't worry, it's not a bad thing. Upon seeing Mo Tienga's expression, Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled very amiably. He personally pulled her to sit across from him and even poured a cup of wine for her. Master, Lord Daoist Jinghe began to say, the yang spiritual aura inside your body indeed came from us. You know Master's aptitude. I have a single fire spiritual root, which can be considered excellent. Unfortunately, my luck wasn't on my side, so I couldn't be considered a genius whether I formed my gold core or my nascent soul. Tinga stared at him without saying anything. She knew this wasn't the main point. Lord Taoist Jinghe acted as if he didn't know how nervous she was. He continued to say slowly, "Presumably, you also understand that a constitution with a mixture of yin and yang has a mixture of yin and yang spiritual aura. In that case, once spiritual aura entered your body, it would quickly disperse. Only pure yang spiritual aura could be so pure and stay in your body for such a long time. Therefore, the yang spiritual aura inside your body should have come from someone with a pure yang constitution or someone close to a pure yang constitution." Upon seeing the slight change in Tinga's expression, Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. "Of course it wasn't me. If I had a pure yang constitution and a single spiritual root, how could I have wasted all these years?" Tinga was silent for a long time. The expression on her face kept changing. After a long time, she finally said, "Master, don't tease me. Tell me everything at once." Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. "You don't have to be like this. You've been under my tutelage for all these years. You should know very well how I've treated you." In that split second, Tinga indeed became suspicious. Upon hearing what Lord Taoist Jinghe said, she suppressed her suspicions and said as calmly as possible, "I know. Master, continue." She already knew where the pure yang spiritual aura came from. There is actually such a coincidence in this world. She already met Tang Shun. How could there possibly be another person with a pure yang constitution? Lord Taoist Jinghe shook the wine cup in his hand and said bluntly, "In fact, your senior martial brother doesn't have a pure yang constitution." Tinga was stunned. She cried out involuntarily, "How's that possible? If he didn't have a pure yang constitution, how could he have pure yang spiritual aura?" Tinga's mind raced as she asked, "Could it be that he has some kind of cultivation technique?" "You're half right." Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded, then asked, "Do you know there's a spiritual object in this world called yang spiritual bead?" "Yang spiritual bead?" Tinga frowned and pondered. She then said slowly, "I seem to have read about it in some ancient book, but it wasn't very detailed. I don't know the specifics. To be exact, yang spiritual beads aren't the only things that exist in this world. Yin spiritual beads also exist. When heaven and earth were first separated, yin and yang auras blended together, giving rise to countless spirit veins. However, there is a kind of strange object born in spirit veins that specialized in swallowing either the yang spiritual aura or yin spiritual aura in spirit veins. Over time, that strange object swallowed all the yang spiritual aura and yin spiritual aura in the spirit veins, giving rise to yang spiritual beads or yin spiritual beads. From ancient times until now, yin and yang spiritual beads rarely appeared in the world, so there are very few ancient records about them. But coincidentally, your senior martial brother Shojing happened to obtain a yang spiritual bead 100 years ago. Tinga's expression changed. She already understood what had happened. Lord Taoist Jinghe continued to say, "When he obtained this bead, I originally thought the yang spiritual aura inside his body would be extremely vigorous, and it just so happened that he cultivated a fire element cultivation technique. In that case, the two of them would bring out the best in each other. But the changes that happened later were because of you." "Because of me?" "Correct." Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. "In the end, let him tell you himself. Some things aren't suitable for Master to say." The corners of Tinga's mouth twitched. In the end, she couldn't help but say, "Master, when I worshipped you, I didn't." Halfway through her words, Lord Taoist Jinghe already understood what she meant. After denying her question, he said with a smile, "Although it wasn't Master's initiative to accept you, I didn't have any ulterior motives. You're Master's last disciple now, so no matter what I do, I won't force you to do anything. As for how you'll walk your own path in the future, it's up to you." At this point, Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled again and patted her shoulder softly. Don't let your imagination run wild. It's time for you to form your gold core. If you put your mind on other things, you'll inevitably have a flaw in your mental state, and that wouldn't be a good thing. Tinga nodded, trying her best to calm down. Although she was naturally suspicious, she trusted her own judgment more. She worshipped Master as her master's disciple for nearly 40 years. She saw and felt how Master treated her with her own eyes. If Master had any bad intentions, why would he treat her like that all these years? However, when she suddenly heard this news, she couldn't help but be shocked. What kind of situation was this? And these 3 years, what were they? Chapter 252. The sky above Clear Spring Peak was cloudless, and the spiritual aura was faintly discernible. Tinga closed her eyes and stood in the air with her palms facing each other. A thin spiritual aura circulated back and forth between her palms. This spiritual aura was thin at first, but it gradually thickened and finally gathered into a very strong orange color. Tinga frowned deeply as if she was enduring something. Before long, this spiritual aura suddenly soared and completely enveloped her body, forming a spiritual aura shield. Tinga opened her eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. After obtaining this yang spiritual aura, the real origin finally appeared in her body. Unfortunately, this spiritual aura was really rare, so she could only use some small spells. This was a small spell recorded in Taiyuan record called Art of the Origin. This spell used spiritual aura to defend oneself. It consumed very little spiritual aura, but its defensive ability was very good. If one was proficient in using it, they could absorb a lot of attacks during fights of magical power. When cultivators in the Foundation building realm and above fought, their magic tools often carried spiritual aura attacks, so they would use spiritual aura shields during fights of magical power. This Art of the Origin was also a kind of spiritual aura shield, but it consumed much less spiritual aura than ordinary ones. While she was practicing it over and over again, Tinga's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She instinctively looked into the distance. She felt the spiritual aura in his body surging, and he couldn't control it at all. Suddenly, his meridians were seriously injured, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. In the air, a humanoid figure wrapped in black aura descended and sneered. Shojing, how do you feel? It doesn't feel good to be surrounded by devil aura, does it? She wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and stood up unsteadily. Although his face was pale, his eyes were calm. It's just so. Standing several feet away from him, the person heard his words and laughed. You're indeed Jinghe's disciple. You're tough. Even so, he waved his hand, and the black aura once again wrapped around Shi. She had nowhere to retreat and was about to be wrapped up, but suddenly a flame shot out of his hands and forced the black aura back a bit. The person was greatly surprised. You can actually force back my primordial devil aura? Shi smiled. A long sword flickering with flames suddenly appeared in his hand. It had an amazing momentum and a threatening spiritual aura. With this sword in hand, even though he was heavily injured, he still had some power. 3-yang real fire sword. This is the 3-yang real fire sword? The man muttered to himself with interest. You're quite interesting, Junior. You could be considered a rare treasure to be able to repel my primordial devil chi. Unfortunately, you're destined to die by my hands today. This old man loves talented people. You can also be considered a character, so I'll let you try and see whether your 3-yang real fire sword can harm this old man. She didn't say anything. The flame on the sword in his hand became even brighter. It floated in the air and hovered in front of him. As he stared at the sword, a hint of killing intent flashed in his eyes. He raised his head and looked at the monster covered in black gas. Seeing the look in his eyes, this person became even more excited. He was waiting for this interesting junior to make his last stand. The 3-yang real fire sword slowly floated up, and the flames became more intense. She closed his eyes and gathered his aura. He was just about to make his move. All of a sudden, he changed his hand seal. The three-yang real fire sword turned into a raging flame and shot towards this person. In the blink of an eye, she turned into a flight light and flew in the opposite direction. This person raised his hand and waved. The flame in front of him was instantly extinguished. How could it be as powerful as it was just now? When he saw the fleeing flight light, his expression suddenly changed. Qin Shoujing. Junior, you're really cunning and treacherous. This brat didn't want to fight him at all. He just let him think so, but in the end, he took advantage of his carelessness and instantly escaped. However, although this person stomped his feet in anger, he didn't take it to heart. This Qin Shoujing was, after all, a core formation cultivator. No matter how cunning he was, the gap between their strengths was too big, so there was no need to worry. Therefore, after he used his divine sense to lock on Qin Shoujing, he leisurely turned into a black cloud and chased in the direction Qin Shoujing escaped. But the more he chased, the more he felt something was wrong. Qin Shoujing almost escaped to the edge of his divine sense range and almost lost his target several times. How could this kind of speed be a core formation cultivator's escaping technique? He couldn't figure it out no matter how he thought about it, but he was even more annoyed in his heart. He immediately launched his escaping technique with all his strength and chased after Qin Shoujing. Mo Tinga hesitated for a moment. Several rays of light appeared in the sky above Mount Taikong. The yellow one was Lord Daoist Xinyang. The red one was Lord Daoist Jinghe. The blue one was Lord Daoist Miaoyi, and the cyan one was Lord Daoist Xianin. The four nascent soul Lord Daoists instantly flew into the sky and looked into the distance. Lord Daoist Xinyang's expression changed first. Not good. It's that old man's song phone. Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression turned livid. He actually dared to attack my Mount Taikong. Lord Daoist Xinyang frowned and immediately said, Junior Marshal Brother Jinghe, come with me. Junior Marshal Sister Miaoyi, Junior Marshal Brother Xianin, you two stay here and support us. Miaoyi and Xianin only answered yes. Then the two nascent Soul Lord Taoists with the highest cultivation levels in Xianxing School instantly flew away. In the distance, Mo Tinga was lost in thought. What happened in the end? Why did Master and the other martial uncles look so serious? Just as she was hesitating whether she should go forward or not, Lord Daoist Miaoyi waved at her. Mo Tinga was delighted and hastily flew forward. Martial Uncle Miaoyi, Martial Uncle Xianin. Miaoyi asked with a kind expression, Tinga, why are you staying here? Mo Tinga and Lord Daoist Xianin were originally from the same sect, so she didn't need to be afraid of anything. Although Lord Daoist Miaoyi didn't have many dealings with Clear Spring Peak, she had always been kind to juniors like them. Now that she heard Miaoyi's question, Mo Tinga said bluntly, Martial Uncle Miaoyi, my heart is beating very fast. Did something big happen? Miaoyi was a bit surprised to hear that, but she quickly replied, something big indeed happened, but your master and Martial Uncle Xinyang are here, so you don't need to worry. You should go back to avoid being affected. With four nascent soul cultivators here, she indeed had no right to intervene. Mo Tinga had no choice but to agree. Yes. After she left, Miaoyi glanced at Xianin and said, Junior Martial Brother Xianin, with Junior Martial Sister's senses are really sharp. Xianin, who was spreading his divine sense with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He didn't answer but said, why would that devil song phone chase us to Mount Taikong? Xianxing School is one of the best cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole, but he's really bold. Miaoyi chuckled. Didn't he come to make trouble during your soul formation ceremony? That old man, Song Feng, relies on his strength in fights of magical powers. I'm afraid he even dares to charge into Tiandao sect. Xianin shook his head and sighed. I wonder if Master and Senior Martial Brother Xinyang can save Junior Martial Brother Shoujing in time. It depends on his luck. Miaoyi didn't say anything else after she said that. The two of them spread their divine senses to observe the situation in the distance. None of the Xianxing School cultivators under the nascent soul realm knew what was happening, but the two of them were very clear about the life and death situation not far away. How could a core formation cultivator escape unscathed from a great late-stage nascent soul cultivator? They knew in their hearts that if they were careless, or if Lord Taoist Jinyang and Lord Taoist Jinghe weren't careful, Qin Shoujing's life would be forfeit. After a while, Lord Taoist Miaoi's face lit up. Junior Marshal Brother Xianin, let's go help them. Xianin responded. The two of them also turned into a flight light and disappeared in the sky above Mount Taikong. Mo Tinga stood in front of Shangqing Palace, silently looking at the empty sky. She felt agitated, but she couldn't tell why. Before long, several figures finally appeared in the sky. Jinyang and Miaoi left midway, while Lord Taoist Xianin supported another person and followed Lord Taoist Jinghe to clear Spring Peak. Mo Tinga stared at them closely. Her eyes widened when she saw the person leaning on Lord Taoist Xuanin's body in a sorry state. Tinga, Lord Taoist Jinghe, was a bit surprised to see her, but he immediately said, "It's too late. Let's go." Lord Taoist Xianin followed him into Shangqing Palace while supporting the unconscious Qin Shi. Mo Tinga also followed them. As soon as Lord Taoist Xianin put Qin Shi down, Lord Taoist Jinghe immediately fed him several medicinal pills, then used his spiritual aura to heal his injuries. Just by looking at Qin Shi's injuries, it was obvious how serious they were. His robe was stained with several bloodstains, his face was pale, his eyes were closed, and the spiritual aura in his body was weak and unstable. So her uneasiness just now was actually because he was injured? Who could injure him like this and even alarm 4 nascent soul cultivators from her school? Her mind was a mess, and she couldn't think of a reason. Lord Taoist Xianin noticed it and said in a low voice, "Tinga, if you're anxious, you might as well wait outside. Don't disturb Master." Mo Tinga was about to say something, but she heard Lord Taoist Jinghe suddenly say, "No, Tinga, come here." Mo Tinga was stunned and approached him. "Master." Lord Taoist Jinghe pointed at Qin Shi and said, "Right now, the spiritual aura in his body is chaotic, and his meridians and dantian are both heavily injured. Although I used medicinal pills and spiritual aura to suppress his injuries, it's very difficult to smooth his spiritual aura. His meridians and dantian are too seriously injured. If I use too much force, his injuries will worsen. Only your spiritual aura is attracted to it, and it's gentle, so I can give it a try." Mo Tinga was puzzled. "Master, don't delay." With a solemn expression, Lord Taoist Jinghe shouted, "Quick, use your spiritual aura to enter his meridians and slowly nourish them. Guide his spiritual aura back to his meridians. Don't worry, I'll tell you what to do." Without time to explain, Lord Taoist Jinghe helped Qin Shi up and told Mo Tinga to place her palm on the Lingtai acupoint on his back, then pour her spiritual aura into it. Mo Tinga did as she was told and slowly poured her spiritual aura in, but her whole body trembled. The spiritual aura in Qin Shi's body was completely out of control. A cultivator's spiritual aura was generally controlled inside his meridians. It flowed between his meridians and finally gathered in his dantian, just like blood. However, the spiritual aura in Qin Shi's body was now running around everywhere. It wasn't bound by his meridians at all. This kind of situation was quite dangerous. Cultivators cultivated both their meridians and their bodies, but their meridians were always more important than their bodies. Although their bodies were full of spiritual aura, they definitely couldn't withstand the dense spiritual aura in their meridians. In particular, the higher one's cultivation level was, the more severe this kind of situation was. Qin Shi was now a peak stage core formation cultivator, so the density of the spiritual aura in his body was no small matter. Right now, the spiritual aura running around in his body was already riddled with internal injuries. If he hadn't practiced body refining techniques, he probably would have been half dead by now. Mo Tinga's spiritual aura entered his body, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no trace of it, and she couldn't guide it at all. The gap between their cultivation levels was too big. "Master!" Just as she was about to ask something, she immediately discovered that her spiritual aura was also out of control. It was being guided by a force, rushing madly into Qin-Shi's body. Chapter 253. Master. Mo Tinga couldn't help but call out. Her own spiritual aura was also out of control. Lord Taoist Jinghe's expression froze. He pressed his palm on the top of Mo Tinga's head and shouted, "Don't worry. Take your time to control your spiritual aura." A powerful spiritual aura pressure suppressed Mo Tinga's almost out-of-control spiritual aura. With a nascent soul cultivator keeping watch, Mo Tinga finally calmed down and regained control. The spiritual aura inside Qin-Shi's body was now rampaging and riddled with scars. Mo Tinga also felt uncomfortable when she poured her spiritual aura into his body. Her cultivation level was much lower, so once her spiritual aura entered his body, it would be taken away and she couldn't guide Qin-Shi's spiritual aura at all. Even with Lord Taoist Jinghe's support, she could only barely control her spiritual aura. However, she couldn't resist the mutual attraction of yin and yang's spiritual aura. The two streams of spiritual energy intertwined with each other, both absorbing her spiritual energy and drawing in his spiritual energy. Gradually, the meridians of the two connected, forming a great circulation. At this point, Mo Tinga didn't need to guide anything anymore. Their spiritual auras automatically mixed and slowly recovered some kind of pattern. His spiritual aura gradually withdrew from every part of his body and gathered in his meridians, connecting with hers and slowly devouring all her yin spiritual aura. When Mo Tinga woke up, she couldn't tell where she was. She wanted to get up, but her vision blurred. Her vision gradually became clear. She forced a smile. Yi Jinji looked at her, wanting to say something, but hesitating. In the end, he just said, "Auntie, Grandmaster said your spiritual aura is exhausted, so don't rush to move. Cultivate for a few days and recover your spiritual aura first." Really? She rubbed her brows and suddenly remembered. "How's your master?" "Master." He shook his head. "His situation is complicated. Annie should ask Grandmaster about the details. But he's fine. He just won't wake up for a while." "I see." She thought for a moment, then asked, "How long have I been unconscious?" "For hours," Yi Jinji said. "Auntie, you should rest for a while. Grandmaster said you're too tired. You should rest well so you can recover your vitality sooner." Mo Tinga nodded. To make an inappropriate analogy, her current situation was as if she'd been completely plucked. She'd lost all the spiritual energy in her body, and she needed to slowly meditate and adjust her breathing in order to recover as quickly as possible. After thinking for a while, she suddenly remembered, "Your master is seriously injured. As his disciple, you should be attending to him. Why are you here with me?" Yi Jinji hesitated. "But Auntie, you also..." Mo Tinga said, "I'm fine now, so you can go. After all, you are your master's only disciple. If you don't do some things, no one will do them. Don't think that it doesn't matter, understand?" Yes. It wasn't that Yi Jinji didn't understand. When he looked at Mo Tinga again, he saw that aside from her pale complexion, there wasn't anything abnormal about her. So he said, "Annie, I'll be going now. If you have something to say, you must tell me." "I know. Don't worry." Once she sent Yi Jinji away, she closed her eyes and collapsed again. After a while, she regained her strength, stood up, opened the restrictions on Mingxin residents, entered the virtual sky world, and began to adjust her breathing. Although the late stage of the foundation building realm and the peak stage of the core formation realm were only one big realm apart, the spiritual aura difference was dozens of times. If Lord Taoist Jinghe wasn't present, her realm would have probably regressed due to the gap between their cultivation levels. Fortunately, she only had empty spiritual aura now, and her meridians and dantian were still intact. As long as she cultivated slowly for several days, her spiritual aura would naturally recover. In the next few days, aside from when Yi Zhenji and Lord Taoist Jinghe came, Mo Tinga stayed in the virtual sky world to adjust her breathing. The virtual sky world was full of spiritual aura. Coupled with the many panaceas Lord Taoist Jinghe gave her, it only took Mo Tinga 3 to 5 days to recover. She left the virtual sky world and went to the main hall of Shanqing Palace. Lord Taoist Jinghe was sitting and looking at the sky, thinking about something. Master? Lord Taoist Jinghe regained his train of thought and saw her. Oh, Tinga, are you all right? And Mo Tinga dawdled for a while before finally sitting in front of Lord Taoist Jinghe. Is Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing all right? He's fine. Lord Taoist Jinghe's gaze seemed to contain some kind of deep meaning. He stared at her for a long time, as if he was probing her. He then said, You don't seem surprised at all. Mo Tinga didn't understand what he meant. Surprised about what? Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled and said, I remember you've been my disciple for so many years, but you've never met your senior martial brother Shoujing. I've also never mentioned his name in front of you. Mo Tinga was stunned. She realized what he wanted to say, so she lowered her head in silence. Lord Taoist Jinghe heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. It seems I don't need to say anything. You already knew. Mo Tinga was silent but calm. She knew Qin Shi, but she'd never met Qin Shoujing. When she saw him that day, she didn't have any doubts that he was a core formation cultivator. Today, she even asked about Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, as if it was a matter of course. What did this mean? Lord Taoist Jinghe picked up the wine cup and drank it. He then looked at her again. Can you tell Master when you found out? Mo Tinga lowered her head and fiddled with the jade pendant on her waist. This spirit-concealing pendant was originally hanging around her neck, but it was snatched away by Wan Mingzhu in the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation. Later, when she woke up, it was Yi Zhenji who returned it to her. The round jade pendant was engraved with exquisite cloud patterns. In the middle of one side, a small Qin character was engraved. When she was 10 years old, she obtained this jade pendant, and it never left her side. In her spare time, she also held the jade pendant and thought about what its previous owner was like. Did he have bad intentions? Later, when she came to Xianxing School, it wasn't that she didn't want to meet Master Taoist Shoujing, but she never had the chance to. That was until she entered Zhong Mulink's virtual sky world during the demonic beast riot. In the year of the demonic beast riot, I went to war with Senior Marshal Sister Suxin. Lord Taoist Jinghe was stunned. So early? Mo Tinga lowered her head and smiled, but there was no smile in her eyes. At first, I never thought about it. Until that year, when I went to war with Senior Marshal Sister Suxin. We went to Luoyin Cliff and accidentally entered Great Ancestor's virtual sky world. I heard Great Ancestor say that Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing went missing for several days because he accidentally entered Great Ancestor's illusory sky formation. Later, Great Ancestor said there was a boy surnamed Qin who came to look for me. I thought it was Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, but it turned out to be Senior Marshal Brother Qin. You became suspicious just because of that. Mo Tinga shook her head. At that time, I just thought it was very strange. Later, when we left the virtual sky world, Senior Marshal Brother Qin was obviously injured, but I heard Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing was heavily injured and went back to Mount Taikong. Later, I never heard any news about Senior Marshal Brother Qin again. Lord Taoist Jinghe was silent for a long time before he finally said, No wonder you never asked about that Senior Marshal Brother Qin all these years. In the virtual sky world, Great Ancestor once talked to another deification senior in front of me. He said Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing had a yang spiritual bead. At that time, I didn't know what a yang spiritual bead was. Later, Senior Marshal Brother Qin came to look for me. Great Ancestor also said Senior Marshal Brother Qin had metal and fire dual spiritual roots, both of which belonged to the yang attribute, and he also had a yang spiritual bead. I became suspicious. Many things about Qin Shoujing weren't secrets in Xianxing School. For example, he had metal and fire dual spiritual roots. Even an ordinary part-time disciple would know about this. Moreover, even if she didn't know what a yang spiritual bead was from what great ancestors said, she also understood it was a rare spiritual treasure in the world. How could two people have it at the same time? At this point, Mo Tinga smiled again. There are some things that might be normal if you don't have any suspicions, but if you have suspicions, you'll feel like there are flaws everywhere. After I had this thought, I carefully thought about it. Which part of the so-called senior martial brother Chin looked like a low-level cultivator? When he was in Yunwu's sect, he didn't like to talk to low-level disciples like us because the difference in realms was too big, so he had nothing to say. Later, when my secret was leaked and second uncle and I escaped from Mount Yunwu, we were besieged by a group of foundation-building cultivators. As soon as senior martial brother Chin arrived, he saved us. I originally thought he had some kind of secret technique, and it was inconvenient for him to tell me. Later, I thought everything would make sense if he was a core formation cultivator. Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. Master also thought I couldn't hide it from you for too long, but I never heard you mention it all these years, so I thought I really hid it from you. The most important thing is, if senior martial brother Chin really existed, why was he unknown in Xianqing school? I never thought I'd find an excuse for senior martial brother Chin, but after I thought about it, I realized it was completely reasonable to replace senior martial brother Shoujing's identity with senior martial brother Chin's. Lord Taoist Jinghe heaved a long sigh. Then why didn't you tell me all these years? Mo Tinga kept her head lowered and stared at her toes. She was silent for a while before she said softly, Master, to be honest, I felt very uncomfortable at that time. I didn't understand why. I was very grateful to senior martial brother Chin for taking care of me all the way back then, but when I suddenly discovered this matter, I always wondered what he was trying to do. Lord Taoist Jinghe, who had been quietly listening to her, now frowned and shook his head. You've always been steady, but you're still young, and your temperament is a bit suspicious. When you suddenly discovered this matter, you inevitably panicked and always thought about the worst. What happened after that? After that, I paid attention for a long time. Sure enough, if I didn't ask, there seemed to be no trace of senior martial brother Chin in the whole of Xianqing school. At that time, I even suspected that his name was fake, right? Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. His name was real. However, before Shi formed his gold core, he didn't use his real identity when he was outside. After he formed his gold core, according to the school's rules, he didn't use his real name anymore and used his Taoist name. Not to mention outsiders, even among the disciples of the school, only a few know his real name. Mo Tinga also smiled. She didn't know whether she should feel a bit gratified or not. At least his name was real. Lord Taoist Jinghe asked again, It's been several decades, but you never said it. Is it because you mind or because you've forgiven him? Mo Tinga paused for a while, then said slowly, In terms of identity, he's your blood-related descendant and also your direct disciple. I was accepted by Master as your disciple because of him. In terms of cultivation level, he's a core formation cultivator and is about to advance to the nascent soul realm, but I haven't formed my gold core yet. What position do I have to forgive him or not? Lord Taoist Jinghe frowned. You're belittling yourself like this. Could it be that you still have resentment in your heart? Chapter 254. Mo Tinga was silent for a while, then shook her head. I'm not belittling myself. It's just the truth. I know the difference between the peak stage of the core formation realm and the late stage of the foundation building realm. Even if I'm talented, I'm still a foundation building cultivator before I form my core or nascent soul. Lord Taoist Jinghe sighed. I really don't know if you're clear-headed or if you're too demanding on yourself. None of his disciples were like her. She was already a nascent soul cultivator's disciple, but she still regarded herself as an ordinary foundation-building cultivator. Mo Tinga looked up with a smile. Master, when have I ever belittled myself? In Xianqing school, I can do whatever I want. I can look down on them in terms of status, but I can in terms of mentality. After a long time, Lord Taoist Jinghe finally said, You're very smart. Although you're not the most intelligent among Master's disciples, you're the smartest. Knowing where one should stand and what one should do, this was also a kind of wisdom. After saying that, Lord Taoist Jinghe immediately asked, "You think you're in no position to forgive him? What's your attitude towards him?" Mo Tiange was silent again. There were some things even she herself wasn't sure about. "Master, Senior Marshal Brother Shojing and my father are friends, so I should regard him as an elder, but when I met him, I only thought he was an ordinary aura refining disciple." Lord Taoist Jinghe heard the hesitation in her words and couldn't help but say, "When your father met you, he was almost 300 years old, right? And if we're talking about age, your father is almost 200 years older than him. Besides, they were just in trouble together. So how could there be a difference in seniority between you two? Besides, we cultivators don't stick to seniority. There are precedents even between master and disciple." Mo Tiange lowered her head and said nothing. She didn't stick to seniority. She just needed to find a reason for herself. "I've seen it all these years. If you didn't care about him, you wouldn't have been unwilling to mention him for dozens of years. Master?" Mo Tiange called out hurriedly. She looked up at Lord Taoist Jinghe, then lowered her head again and said slowly, "Don't talk nonsense. I didn't think about anything." Lord Taoist Jinghe paused and said anxiously, "Why didn't you think about anything? You clearly—" "Master," Mo Tiange once again interrupted him with a frown. "What are you talking about?" Lord Taoist Jinghe could sense the blame in her words, so he thought about it and decided not to say anything. Young girls were always more troublesome. It was not good to say too much and embarrass them. "All right." Lord Taoist Jinghe retreated in defeat. "I won't talk about this matter anymore. Between the two of you, one wants to form his nascent soul, while the other wants to form her gold core. It's not the right time. By the way, if you've recovered, go and help your senior martial brother heal his injuries. His spiritual energy has already returned to his meridians, but his injuries haven't healed yet. Your spiritual energy is the best for him to heal his injuries. Don't worry about any more problems. His spiritual energy has already flowed smoothly, so he won't forcefully absorb your spiritual energy anymore." Mo Tiange wanted to refuse, but Lord Taoist Jinghe didn't give her a chance to do so. Right after he finished speaking, he assumed a cultivation posture and closed his eyes. "Go quickly. It's already very early." After hesitating for a while, she finally obediently left Enchanting Palace. After she left, Lord Taoist Jinghe opened his eyes and said to himself, "This kind of matter, I'll let you talk about it yourself. That brat will wake up soon. It all depends on your luck." Mo Tiange's mind was extremely chaotic. She stood at the gate of Enchanting Palace for a while, then sent a summoning talisman. Before long, Yi Jinji rushed over and said happily, "Andy, are you all right?" And Mo Tiange smiled somewhat absent-mindedly. "How's your master?" "Master's fine. He just hasn't woken up yet." Yi Jinji was a bit confused. Did she specifically call him over just to ask about this? She could have asked him through the summoning talisman. "Take me to see him." Mo Tiange made up her mind and said, "Your grandmaster ordered me to heal your master." Yi Jinji was stunned for a moment, but he suddenly understood what Lord Taoist Jinghe meant. He wanted to say something, but he felt there were some things he couldn't say, so he could only swallow his words. "Got it. Auntie, come with me." The two of them flew to an uninhabited hilltop. Yi Jinji was the first to land. Mo Tiange looked around. She felt this place was very familiar. She saw Yi Jinji walking towards a bare rock wall, making a series of hand seals, then using a jade talisman to open a formation. All of a sudden, she had a flash of inspiration. She finally understood why this place looked so familiar. This was the place where she rejected by Yin Fei when she was pestered by him. "Auntie?" Yi Jinji stared at her pale and red face, not understanding what was going on. Upon hearing his voice, Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. She wiped the sweat on her forehead, forced herself to calm down, and walked into the cave. Forget it, forget it. How long has it been? Even if I remember, I'm afraid he doesn't. This immortal's cave wasn't much different from the original Mingxin residence. It didn't have exquisite carvings. nor did it have gorgeous and noble furnishings. It was just extremely spacious. In terms of spiritual aura, it was also one of the few spiritual lands on Clear Spring Peak. It wasn't much worse than Enchanting Palace. Master loved luxury, but every disciple he taught was different from him. Whether it was Martial Uncle Xianin, Senior Martial Sister Su Xin, this Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, or even herself, none of them liked extravagance. This phenomenon was actually quite interesting. Yi Jinji took her to the innermost stone room as he let his imagination run wild. After making a series of hand seals, the stone door opened. This stone room was still very simple. With a glance, she saw Qin Shi lying on the frost jade bed. His clothes had already been changed, so he wasn't as disheveled as he was that day. However, his complexion was still deathly pale, and he was lying there silently. Mo Tinga slowly approached him and stared at the face she hadn't seen for a long time. His appearance was actually very handsome. Even in the cultivation world, where handsome men were everywhere, he didn't lose out to others. His deep eyebrows were like the lines of sculpture. Presumably, even if he was old, he'd still look like Lord Daoist Jinghe, still giving people a sense of heroic spirit. However, she missed the Qin Shi from Mount Yunwu. Although he was somewhat handsome, he wore the clothes of a low-level disciple and was unremarkable everywhere. Even though he didn't have the slightest bit of elegance back then, even though his cultivation level was extremely low, even now, she had to admit that 40 years of time didn't erase her love for him. Even though they hadn't met for 30 years, his face was still deeply engraved in her heart. What was love? She was still confused, but she remembered that the man she fell in love with in the 10,000 laws of nature formation, and when she was under the 5 hindrances overturning senses, was his appearance. So what if she admitted it? During those 2 months, she had a good impression of him. In the following few years, her feelings gradually faded, but she suddenly discovered his deception. Thus, from that moment on, she always missed him and felt restless. The more she remembered and thought about him, the more she couldn't erase him from her heart like before. Some feelings couldn't be explained clearly, and some feelings couldn't be explained clearly. She tried her best to make herself forget him, but she couldn't. Thus, she told herself that if she got him, she should be happy, but if she couldn't, she shouldn't worry about him. It had been 30 years, and she had done it. However, she had to admit that she wanted to stand at the top of the world and hold the whole world in her hands, but she still hoped that he was still standing by her side. Just like that dream. Auntie, Yi Jinji's voice rang in her ears. Mo Tinga regained her train of thought and saw the bewilderment on his face. Her face was a bit hot, so she turned her head away without looking at Yi Jinji's eyes and said, Auntie has to treat your master's injuries. You should go. Yes. After hesitating for a while, Yi Jinji finally went out obediently. Mo Tinga heaved a sigh of relief and pulled herself together. She then helped Qin Shi up, sat behind him, and raised her palm to press the Lingtai acupoint on his back. Her spiritual aura slowly penetrated his meridians without any obstruction. When it entered his meridians, she still felt a sticky force, but it wasn't as strong as it was that day. She slowly controlled her spiritual aura and added it to his spiritual aura. The yin and yang spiritual aura naturally mixed together, and in the end, he seized control of her spiritual aura. Although this time, he still slowly seized her spiritual aura, the process was slow, and the power he used wasn't strong. Besides, the process of treating other people's injuries consumed spiritual aura. Mo Tinga didn't know that when she was unconscious, Qin Shi not only didn't consume any spiritual aura when he treated her, but it even increased. This was also the reason why the gap between their cultivation levels was too big. For Qin Shi, treating her injuries and tempering her body didn't require too much spiritual aura, and he more or less obtained some spiritual aura from her. But compared to him, Mo Tinga only had this much spiritual aura. Qin Shi automatically absorbed too much spiritual aura from her, so her spiritual aura decreased instead of increasing. After a while, half of the spiritual aura in her body was used up, so Enchanting made a prompt decision and stopped injecting spiritual aura into his body. If she absorbed too much spiritual aura, she wouldn't be able to stop even if she stopped. She put Qin Shi down again, wanting to see his expression, but what she saw shocked her. She saw Qin Shi slowly opening his eyes. He actually woke up, although she admitted this in front of Lord Taoist Jinghe. Enchanting still wasn't ready to face him. She was stunned for a moment, then she turned around, wanting to leave. However, her wrist was grabbed, and she couldn't move. Tinga, his hoarse voice rang out. Tinga stood there motionless. She couldn't leave, but she also didn't want to turn around. Confusion appeared on Qin Shi's face. He discovered that his meridians were flowing with both familiar and strange, spiritual aura. After a long time, he finally said with a sigh, it was just a sentence, but made her feel tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. The two of them were silent. He didn't let go, but she also didn't turn around. This was the first time he faced her with the identity of Qin Shojing. He didn't hide his cultivation level or his identity. What should I call you? He heard her soft voice. Senior Martial Brother Qin or Senior Martial Brother Shojing? He was still silent, unable to say even half a word. Thus, she turned around and looked at him with a distant and strange gaze. Tell me, what should I call you? Is it important who I am? He moved his gaze, raised his head, and looked at her. Qin Shi is me, and Qin Shojing is also me. Whether it's Qin Shi or Qin Shojing, they're both the same person. Yes, they're both the same person. Enchanting stared at him. She slowly raised her smiling face, but her gaze was ice cold. But the meaning is completely different. He saw the indifference and alienation in her eyes, so he was a bit stiff. He couldn't help but want to ask, why is it different? Enchanting smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Senior Martial Brother Shojing, there are some things you don't need to say too clearly. It was just a form of address, but it already explained her attitude. Qin Shi didn't say anything. Thus, she gently shook off his hand, turned around, and left. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.